Yokoso, y'all. I just want to leave a little content warning in advance of this video. Should be rather obvious with the 3 manga in question, but we're going to be treading on some rather iffy subject matter today. If these topics are too uncomfortable for you to stomach, I can totally appreciate that. This video will also contain spoilers. There will be a list of those in a second for the relevant media covered.
As for the stories I'll be musing about today, for now I'll keep it brief. Berserk is one of the most important works of literature humanity's come to produce. Chainsaw Man is one of the strangest, and you'd be doing yourself a massive disservice by neglecting to read either of these and experience their power firsthand. As for the third of our tales, I am not a beautiful, conniving Irishman with a silver tongue who will guide you astray. If you've yet to read Gantz, I cannot in good conscience direct you to inundate your brain with that garbage. This video is long for a reason. I have a lot to say. I've been living with Hiroya Oku and his 380 chapters of nonsense in my head, rent-free for 2 years, and I need that demon exercised, now. Anyhow, we're in for a doozy of a time here, folks, so get comfy, blend yourself a tasty smoothie, and don't abuse that bottle of extra strength Tylenol in front of you. My name is Stash Douglas, the Heartbroke Hippie. I dropped my last video when I was but a boy, and now, I am a slightly older boy. It matters not. I'm glad to be here, back with a vengeance like Lethal Weapon. And I hope I can do a worthy job as your humble guide this evening for our little descent into madness. Let's get it. I could easily start this chapter off with some banal statement about how these 3 manga are all violent, but let's try to use this segment to actually look deeper in. In storytelling, violence can be applied for many reasons. It can be good symbolic representation of people's relationships. It can also be aesthetically pleasing. It's an innately human behavior, and from that universality, violence can also become a sort of character within the world you build, a constant presence that develops its own story circle parallel to the characters. It can also exist as a constant, a black hole of negativity that isn't escapable. More than that, it exists differently under the surface of action. Only analyzing violence explicitly leaves an incomplete picture. Therefore, it's worthwhile to observe violence as an unconscious force. What I hope to show you is where Berserk and Chainsaw Man definitely burgeon out violence as a robust power in storytelling, Gantz's implicit storytelling through violence is flawed. In order to prove that, we need to effectively find some sort of character of violence within the stories. So with that being considered, in appropriately analyzing any of the 3, it's important to ask ourselves what exactly each says about violence, consciously and unconsciously. Let's start at the peak, Berserk. Kentaro Miura's seminal work that you can draw a direct through line from to get to Devil May Cry. God bless.
Hey Stash, are you gonna talk about the red orbs and how they look like, the beheaded? Hey, look at me, I love DMC. Bro, check it out.
Metal Gear Solid 5 is a very dumb game, filled to the brim with fun, stupid things you can do, that distract you from the fact that it is a very mid-game. Not bad in my opinion though. Calling it bad almost suggests that it provokes thoughts. It's hardly that interesting to me. Still, even within the worst element, the incomplete story, there were diamonds in the rough. One such diamond was the grand motif of the game, conveniently its name, the Phantom Pain. Within the story, the Phantom Pain served as a reminder. It was a symbolic idea of loss, and it swelled through the characters as a constant scar upon their collective psyche. Maybe too, the Phantom Pain was the lost feeling of love and passion Kojima once had for the project he could still feel but could no longer grasp. Thus the Phantom Pain was a bad game. But it was bad on purpose because it had to be a bad game for him to symbolically gesture that saturation bad. What's the saying?
Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, congrats on fooling a dead horse. You know? The one you've been beating?
Anyway, enough about Metal Gear, back to Berserk. Guts is missing an arm. There's your brilliant connection to the Phantom Pain. Okay, this is obviously an oversimplification. Like in Metal Gear Solid 5, Guts' Phantom Pain is endemic of larger struggles. Those struggles seed violence, and that violence paints itself into the wear that builds into his model brilliantly. These injuries last. The arm Guts loses is more than a flimsy parallel to the Phantom Pain. Guts himself expresses the same sentiments that something lost can't ever be rendered fully whole again. Like with Kaz's speech in Metal Gear, the fact that both series have been part of the zeitgeist for decades makes the nature of these moments run deeper. They give pause for pretty sincere retrospective of how far the series have come as a whole. and that's a testament to the veracity of the raw emotions both series have provided. Miura is a prolific artist. Each of his panels are imbued with such awe-inspiring amounts of detail that they just pull you in. The consistent passion and methodical nature of the art builds out the world of Berserk, and develops a realism that I would argue is the greatest facet towards its longevity. The story of Berserk begins with the Black Swordsman arc. Hopping into the middle of Guts' overall story, denoted by the scars all over his body, homie is torn up, quiet, angry, and immediately this draws you to a question. How did he get here? And where did those scars come from? And then the story tells you in the Golden Age arc. And you're exposed to one of the greatest stretches of narrative the world has or ever will know. Here's how you get your answer to how Guts has gotten so messed up, and it tells an honest-to-God heartbreaking development of a broken young man learning to grow to trust the world again only for it to break his trust once more. The best visual storytelling for this development is the roadmap of how Guts collects every major scar on his body. The violence paints itself onto a canvas of Guts, a weight inescapable. Much like Guts will never be able to forget Gambino and his trauma at that point in his life, so too is that scar across the bridge of his nose, which never fades, no matter how many join his collection. When Guts gets sliced and diced in the 100-man gambit in the woods, he finds himself mummified in bandages, and in the wake of that, goes and sits atop a hill in the forest, peering at the moon. So too Guts finds himself swathed in bandages, when he goes berserk and is engulfed in flames on the boat. Both moments match with eerily similar visuals of Guts staring into the depths of the stars, silently pondering in recovery. Finally, at the peak of the emotional turmoil during the eclipse, Guts is forced to 127 hours his arm, only to be pinned down after this. In these moments he's forever gridlocked. One eye will be forced to look forward perpetually unhappy, the other will be closed on a past that will be forever ruined. A time that was once the best of his life is now forever stained. Regardless of unconscious meaning, there's some pretty overt logical conclusion from this scene. Guts doesn't have depth perception anymore. That's why he needs such a long fucking sword. Much like the various scars Guts manages to accrue over his journeys, so too does his sword always somehow get bigger. He practices swinging a slightly smaller, big fucking sword methodically throughout the Golden Age to find the same peace of mind he got swinging as a kid. And he uses that same swing to best Griffith and earn back his freedom. And in that poetic moment, he finds peace in that chapter of his life. Serendipitous is a narrative tie. Beyond that little poetic recontextualization of the sword swing, Guts' endless practice also gives him somewhat believable ability to shoulder that weight, seen and unseen. Perhaps the rawest moment of swordsmanship is found within the beginning of the Golden Age, when Guts faced off against this cocky dickhead Vizuso. Ultimately, this fight inspired me when I was 15 watching the 97 show for the first time. When I saw Guts slice into Vizuso's armor like it was angel food cake, and saw the sepia tone still that 97 always fell back on for budget constraints, I felt my blood rush as the adrenaline pounded my reptilian brain. This young man with a sword the size of his body had just fed me one of the rawest looking shots ever, and when I went on to read the manga, seeing Guts bisect his skull and rearrange Vizuso's brains just as beautifully in ink made my craving for this beautifully depicted ultraviolence intensify. No matter the size of the sword, the carnage of Berserk is always utterly consuming. The rest of the violence in Berserk is going to require a bit of comparison, so let's leave the good at that for a bit. On we go. Well, now we get to talk about the bad. Gantz, Hiroya Oku's seminal work. Not exactly a high bar. Look folks, I'm just going to feed it to you straight. Gantz is fucking bad. With that being said, I'm going to do my best to be charitable to it, because I have to be honest, parts of it are brutally compelling to me. The points where Gantz shines reminds me about how brilliant it could have been, if it wasn't so goddamn dumb. Ultimately, what I hope this section will show you is that Gantz is but a house with a shoddy foundation. Gantz is often prided for developing a rich atmosphere of chaos and intrigue, and while I think it hits these notes at times, on the whole I think that violence often exposes itself as shallow and poorly conceived. Gantz, like Berserk, is also wickedly violent, and honestly, it starts off with a really strong violent framework. You start out with little Tom and Eggy, chillin' out Manchin, Boolin, and then, little green onion alien meets humanity. It's here where we're exposed to the absolute demonic nature of humanity when we're left to our own devices. I'd like to completely divorce myself of this animalistic brutal tendency, seen in the four men crowding the small alien, but as disgusting as this moment is, it's enrapturing in its honesty. It's a Stanford prison experiment type beat, individuals abusing their power in the vacuum of consequence. This moment already had captured a really brilliant little message, a nihilistic reflection of the human spirit, but Gantz somehow managed to top that brilliance, and now you're met with a real villain's entrance. Turns out little homie was bait, and now you gotta take out this big boy. One of y'all already bit it, and you're next. This is a truly terrifying moment. It manages to bottom out the already hopeless context around the human spirit to show how below that there's still punishment for wickedness. Somehow, that which should be rock bottom fell even lower, and if there's one thing to be said for Gantz, it always manages to find a way to go lower. For now though, all we're exposed to is Gantz's brutalistic violence. It's simple as this: people are going to die. It's a bit of a blood-sporting narrative. There are some awe-inspiring moments from our MCK in his black suit, and all in all, it manages to maintain a high-octane vibe throughout the entire arc. Gantz manages to paint a narrative where we are exposed to carnal evil, which is a valuable enough story to tell, and it's almost akin to exhaling all the negativity we hold, and upon letting it out, viewing that dense fog in its fully realized form, pure evil. Within that chaotic evil energy, Gantz does something brilliant. It removes all meaning from death. See, there's the essential self-titled gimmick in Gantz, the ball. And why is it called Gantz? I don't know. Gantz doesn't matter. The ball keeps track of the team's progress in alien hunting, in leet speak, because that won't date the story at all. This progress is tracked by points, already commodifying death and slowly removing all meaning from it in favor of an incentivized system where all meaning is lost in the thrill of the game. Every 100 points collected, human beings have 3 options. 1. Leave the game forever and never be called back into the room. 2. Be given access to a special weapon that can be used for all your future Gantz missions. Or 3. Revive anyone. On the surface, you can evaluate these 3 choices as so. 1 being the selfish decision, opposite of that, 3 being the purely altruistic decision, and in the middle, absolute fucking psychopathy. Well, spoiler alert, because Gantz is going to show you that the only viable route is psychopathy, and that selfishness and altruism are ultimately going to be indistinguishable from one another.
This sets up a pretty tactful subversion of the usual pitfall in narrative, a common walkback that's one of the cheapest moves a writer can pull, reviving a character that by all rights was 6 feet under.
Death has a complete finality that when handled properly can be one of the most impactful beats of a narrative. Death gives life definition, much like art is a reflection of life. With that being said, tired recycled applications of death, or worse yet, deciding to invalidate that weight can often undermine your story, causing me to no longer give a damn about a character. With that being considered, here's Stash Douglas's How To Death.
If I had to come up with my own Watch Mojo Top 10 Shocking Anime Death Chart, you could bet Kamina'd be topping that bad boy. And hey, nothing beats the real thing. So let's just be objective and check Watch Mojo to verify. Hey, second, not bad at all. Verified by a peer-reviewed and trusted organization like Watch Mojo. Wonder who they picked for first. Never mind. Fuck that. Fuck this stupid.
The reason Kamina's death works is because it has a double bait and switch mechanic. Initially, Kamina's death is pretty brutal. Homie's getting impaled due to Simone's inaction. As Kamina's life seems to wane, you get hit with some great feels, and in those moments you're witnessing a pretty tasteful exit for arguably one of the coolest anime big brothers you'll ever see. And then, he doesn't die. And it's bullshit, and I'm loving it, because Gurren Lagann is dumb, and I'm grinning like a dumbass, knowing that this show doesn't need to follow the rules of narrative, because it's sick. And then they win, and I'm thrilled, you know, they're and then Kamina actually dies. In his final moments, he's able to imbue Simone with the confidence to summon his fears as well as the immediate conflict. His story is cut tragically short, but he's made his change.
Had Kamina kicked it there and not caught a second wind, you could have had a blood-crazed Simone obliterate the Beastman on his own. That would have been foundation enough for his reclusive withdrawal in the episodes following.
The story could still function without this dynamic. However, in the double fake-out, you get to see the value in death because Kamina's survival was in reach for a moment's notice, and death breathes meaning into those seconds of life. Now let's consider the following. In the midst of space, and one of the greatest conclusions of any anime, ever, Gurren Lagann plays with the contrivances of death brilliantly. Much like Kamina had his double fake-out, as does Nia. Where Kamina's death is Simone's descent into madness, marking an absolute low point in his story, Simone's meeting Nia is the conduit for his ascent into growth out of the liminality of grief. Likewise, after the time skip, when Simone vows to save Nia, her death is the foil to Kamina's. But this time, death is Simone's guidance to accept loss. In the final battle, Nia is instrumental to Simone's success, and she joins him in the Lagoon, once again, providing the extra boost of support he needed to succeed. Even though it seems like they're gonna make it, since they survive the battle, and they end up getting married afterwards. Right after that, she fades away. And it's brilliant. This is the happiest ending you could possibly have to Gurren Lagann, because you finally witness Simone learn to accept grief, and thrive in it. The parallelism between Kamina and Nia's sacrifices come to build a really brilliantly little structured story that maintains consistent symbolic meaning within death, such that death becomes a purposeful character. The main purpose of that rant was to expose that Gurren Lagann succeeded at bringing a cohesive meaning to death in the world. This is one of the benefits of narrative. It's a sort of therapeutic catharsis that allows us to muse and assert meaning to concepts in real life that are uncomfortably ambiguous. Being able to pin down those overwhelming topics can really define your story and give it a greater sense of value. A narrative that maintains that consistency can almost feel like it's taught you something. And considering that angle, I'm going to go ahead and compliment Gantz. If certain implementations of character revival can cheapen a narrative, Gantz manages to take the idea of cheap and put it through a fucking car compactor until it's been flattened to absolute worthlessness. Death doesn't matter in Gantz. It's as normal as breathing, facilitating the overwhelmingly violent negativity of the story people love. See, when you look at the idea of bringing someone back to life through the Gantz ball, it seems to be righteous upon first glance, but it quickly reveals itself to be anything but. In Gantz, you can bring your friends back, but they'll ultimately be doomed to continue to fight for their very own 100 points to escape themselves. This is a constant moral dilemma that ramps up in the endgame. That endgame being that Gantz soldiers have been doomed to be frontline cannon fodder for the quote-unquote catastrophe. Both the preliminary issue and the catastrophe raise a question. Maybe it's better not to bring people back. The brilliance of that route is at its foundation, Gantz established death as an empty concept, and the various meanings people tend to ascribe to it after are only a passing attempt to try to find meaning in chaos. It's reflective of real life, and this motif reflects a brutal honesty about us as a species. We desperately cling to life as though it's so inherently worthwhile, while in all reality, a lot of that desperation comes from a complete fear of death itself. Comparatively to the definition of death provided earlier, Gantz portrays life as an indefinite series of pain and humiliation. The only reprieve is to be such a dogshit character no one, not the mangaka, not the cast, not even the fans, wants you back next volume. I get you, buddy. I wouldn't want to be in Gantz neither.
And that's where we'll stop with Gantz for now. It's also one of the last nice things I'll say about the series. After all, fuck Gantz.
Now we finally get to talk about the ugly. What a lovely ugly it is. Tatsuki Fujimoto's brilliant little mecha of ultra-violence, Chainsaw Man is a manic depiction of a boy coming into his own. That coming of age involving more bodily fluids than it has any right to, and not even the fun ones. If Berserk exceeds in getting the audience's blood pumping with the violence it develops, while Gantz reduces violence to a nihilistic natural byproduct of the world, Chainsaw Man stares and says, why not both? As if it weren't obvious by the fact that our protagonist grows a chainsaw out of his fucking face, this story isn't taking itself too seriously. If you want a great example of the pure strangeness, look no further than the first chapter, where Denji's tasked to murk this tomato-looking abomination. This creature looks like it failed an audition to make it as an apostle in Berserk. In a panel later, we're met with this brilliant image of Denji just standing over the body, which is just a bloody mess of its remains. And somehow this is even more off-putting than before. That's before we're told that this is actually a genuine fucking tomato. This is ridiculous, if it wasn't clear enough by the fact that the man is literally holding a cartoon dog chainsaw in his hands. And it manages to tackle two things. 1. The violence is awesome, despite Fujimoto saying he can't draw action. He's wrong. 2. It establishes that carnal thrill of Berserk while also managing to reveal a nonsensical meaninglessness akin to Gantz as well. This finds itself fixed upon a vapid thrill of violence. This all hinges upon a really brilliant little structure, and from now on we'll discuss violence in Chainsaw Man via the metaphor of fire. In order to maintain a fire in its most basic capacity, you need three things: fuel, a spark, and oxygen. The violence in Chainsaw Man is paralleling these three things. First, the fuel, blood. The otherworldly and grandiose violence only intensifies in this fuel. Devils are healed by blood, and therefore, all potential to kill a devil is limited by their persistence to be a continual entropic force so long as blood keeps flowing. But fuel in and of itself isn't going to do much on its own. We need a spark to light this bad boy up. That spark in our narrative founds itself on our main character being an adolescent boy. To quote Friday Night Lights' Coach Taylor,
if you're wondering if a boy is thinking about you, he's not. He's thinking about sex or he's hungry. Those are the only two options.
A biscuit. Never.
Well, that's right about on the money for Denji. And food plays more into his oxygen, but for now let's just focus on the spark. Sex. See, Denji's usual motivation for dumb shenanigans is that he wants to pipe down a girl, and valid. Young men do stupid things in the pursuits of sex. Old men learn to do stupid things in order to reject it. Thus, me making a 3-hour-long video about Berserk is mature. Take that, Dad!
A biscuit. Never.
Point is, immature as it may be, that little spark is brilliant, and it reads perfectly natural given the circumstances. And so, Denji throwing himself into harm's way for sex at many turns is the perfect little fire starter for our narrative development. So now your vapid thrill of violence has found itself a self-fulfilling fuel. Why do I really? Which prepares itself to illuminate the dark sky. And it's also had its spark of sexuality, and thus your violent bonfire of a story lights the hell up. In those flames, we return to the external motivation, the oxygen breathing life into the story as well. That's that Denji ain't just in it for the thrill of it all. He has to live. This oxygen manifests itself in anything from his new reliable source of food, all of which he finds luxurious, to finding a new roof over his head, more secure than his initial decrepit shack, all the way up to Denji fighting for his life. The fire's oxygen is Denji's base needs, and built up from those needs is his innate desire to survive. After the dust is settled, we're met with some kino, brutal violence where Denji just rips everybody in the immediate area to shreds, becoming rather feral, exposing the true nature of the violence in the narrative. It's ugly, but despite that ugliness, more than anything, that violence is completely magnetic. It's about a boy who's dedicated himself to violence, and it's become his very existence. That's a rather dark route to force upon your main character, but that's countered with another facet of the story. Chainsaw Man is fucking hilarious. Within senseless killing, the humorous foundation Chainsaw Man takes allows it to have a wicked sense of humor around ultra-violence. The hotel arc is my favorite section of Chainsaw Man, because it comprises the aforementioned fiery violence so well. and it gains some humor from the spark. Right into the arc, we're met with Denji's perceived reward. Himeno offers whoever kills the devil a kiss on the cheek. How scandalous. However, our proud warrior Denji no longer needs such vapid, trivial lust from a thought. He is a man of character, love, and fully Hey! She'll tongue punch you if you murder the devil. At first, the devil seems to be taken care of with relative ease, and not by Denji no less. So at face value, our spark seems like it's going to be lying dormant for a while. Turns out the devil they murk isn't the one they're after, so maybe it's still alive. But for the time being, the fire doesn't look like it's going to start. Then something weird happens. The devil hunters find themselves trapped within this hotel, in a Twilight Zone-like development. The characters all slowly start to lose their marbles. Except for Denji, that is. He reverts to being a simpleton, with his base needs prioritized. Homie just wants to hit the big snooze. He's on his Garfield shit. A man of simple pleasures. And the oxygen feeding the fans at his base level is again that he's coming from nothing. Sleeping on a bed is a lot better than a dusty ass shack, and you know what, he's alive. Well, for a minute at least. The mood starts to sour when the devil rears its head. It demands that they give it Denji, or everybody's going to die. And now the existential oxygen that was whistling itself quietly with Denji, catching some Z's, has breathed itself into full realization with an actual threat on his person. You get a pretty base Kobeni reaction shot with a knife, and in this, Denji reverts to his habit of violence, grasping at oxygen that he needs to live. The devil will survive if it eats Denji, and it's willing to make a contract. Morale's gone south. We got ourselves hyperventilating with non-stop anxiety now. Let's get to the fuel. At this point it should be relatively clear that there's something quite wrong with this fire. For instance, if you've ever gone camping, it's quite counterintuitive to just grab your lighter and start blowing on it. Without fuel, you're not going to get anywhere. Likewise, that's the reason this arc is so brilliantly structured. It's backwards. The fuel comes last, and it makes you anticipate the fire all the more, because all the other elements are there, and tension can build to a head as you wait for the final fuel. Where the hell is the blood? Oh baby, there will be blood.
There's a reason the hotel's my favorite arc, because what comes next hits like a truck.
First, you get Denji going full Chad, once again grabbing that initial spark of the French kiss promise, and dropping into the descent of the beast who's trying to eat him, and within that, the fire catches. Like the rest of the story, Denji learns through the absolute delicious violence that comes to surround him. He begins to see patterns and solutions in the absolute chaos. He realizes that the answer to the riddle is to let the fire keep raging. Denji makes himself into a perpetual motion machine, a self-sustaining fire, and it's one that will creep and illuminate a path to greatness. This is the power of Chainsaw Man. It's a pure flame dancing in revelry, a natural force that plugs into the world effortlessly. From that fitting chaos you get hilarity, and also pure unadulterated full measure moments, no better described than based. And that's where we'll break from the general overviews and dissect how these foundations of violence develop into interesting ideas. In Berserk, you have the tale of a man doing his best to keep going in a world where violence never seems to escape him. In Gantz, you have a world where you have to try with all your might to survive this inescapable death game, where nihilism swells throughout the framework. In Chainsaw Man, we have a dude who is jumping into as much carnage as humanly possible so he can touch some MF titties. I assure you, two of these three stories deserve equal consideration as intellectual dissections of violence. Where Berserk and Chainsaw Man become utterly enthralling in the developments out of their violence, Gantz falls apart. You heard me right. Titties provide more contemplative provocation than nihilism.
Take that, Nietzsche, you fucking prick. God ain't dead, bitch. God's a pair of motherfucking tits.
As we've established, Berserk manages to develop violence as a constant, purposeful part of the plot. And this means that even in moments where the rationale for violence becomes rather ambiguous, that ambiguity maintains itself as powerfully earned through consistency. To begin showing Gantz's holes in its foundation, let's contrast some arcs. Specifically the Lost Children arc in Berserk versus the Mothership portion of Gantz. Both of these arcs attempt to provoke a morally ambiguous atmosphere, but Gantz feels a whole hell of a lot more shallow than Berserk. Allow me to elaborate. Within the Mothership arc of Gantz, Kei is motivated to invade the Mother Base in order to save Tae, his girlfriend, and we go on to see all sorts of disgusting treatment of humans. They're sprayed down like animals, causing their clothes to burn off, and then are hung up like racks of meat and harvested because, well, it's because the aliens are horrible space fascists. A chapter later, we're made privy to the fact that the meat rack was actually a fitting visual, and that humans are actual alien cuisine. A bunch of aliens start curb stomping and murdering naked humans for fun, and worse yet, they've all got Bieber cuts. God, lead speaking Bieber cuts, Oku really can't help dating everything. So as of now, in summation, it's pretty clear with the surface level analysis that these alien douchebags are not exactly painting themselves as sympathetic. But then again, we get some sob story about how aliens need to find a new home. Perhaps they're actually a group that deserves sympathy. I don't know. Maybe this ambiguity actually rings true for some people who read this.
But these are space fascists. Refugees as they may be, they are fascists. If you feel bad for these aliens, you are probably either really charitable or an Argentinian with an understandable fear of 23andMe. Regardless, whatever sympathy I had for the poor little green onion alien has long since evaporated, much like his entire body. While I generally feel bad for the one alien who takes pity on Tai and K, on aggregate, I am still of the belief that the space fascists suck and should be murdered. This isn't exactly a conundrum. It's almost illogical that K should defend these aliens. Moreover, K's motivations are only to save the love of his life. It's understandable he'd do that by any means necessary. This moral dilemma is built up as though it's a conflicting moment in the narrative, but as a reader, its poor setup made the ambiguity seem forced and uninteresting. Where Gantz develops an arc where the moral ambiguity still favors you towards the side of the protagonist, Berserk manages to find the perfect balance of complete discomfort. The Misty Valley is horrifying, and the horror is absolutely enthralling. In this arc, we're faced with Gantz, who's understandably broken, but is utterly consumed by wrath, with a will to obliterate any apostle in his path. And then we have to see the children. Much like the bugs in the mothership of Gantz, these little elves, who in all reality are wasps, are gross and primal. It's clear that the little Lord of the Flies colony they've come to embody maintain the worst traits of mankind. But then we also have the ambiguity, because again, they are children. This again begs comparison to Gantz. Gantz's mothership arc failed because it attempted to establish a salient moral ambiguity with an alien murder like it did with the Green Onion alien. Comparatively, in line with the typical power of parallelism and consistency, this is not Berserk's first child murder rodeo. Earlier in the Golden Age, right before it all falls apart, Griffith calls on Guts to go murder Julius, the king's brother who had conspired to have Griffith killed. At face value, this works because Griffith has an intense trust of Guts' abilities. But if I'm being honest, why the hell would you decide a walking giant is the correct agent to handle such an operation subtly? What about Guts screams subtle? Why not send the guy who has an expert control over throwing knives, is relatively dexterous, and could probably handle such an operation with the subtlety it requires? Well, because we need the situation to go horribly wrong and for Guts to impale a child who was conveniently being forced to learn how to sword fight because of his father, which reeks of irony based upon Guts' past with Gambino. Yada yada yada, deep cut for Guts, murders the dad, murders the kid. Horribly reflective eck and Guts, yada yada. Guts gets caught up per usual, goes looking for Griffith. In his absolute exhaustion emotionally, he overhears the words that would motivate him to leave the bed of Hog. As much as I shit on this section for Judo being the obvious choice, especially since Griffith in all his omnipotence should have known Judo was capable of catching onto his plans, I can still appreciate this as a pretty tragic event to cascade the fallen Golden Age. It feels pretty fated. Consequently, it's also the reason Lost Children works so brilliantly. Because now, when we're faced with a forest full of children, unlike before where it was an impactful tragic moment where Guts felt deep grief, now our main character is too blinded by rage to be restrained by the tragic nature of these events, and the violence at play has broken him to the point where his own trauma forces him not to hesitate. Since the beginning of the arc, it's pretty clear that the past 2 years of being the Black Swordsman have left Guts pretty damn unhinged. Early in the arc, Guts uses a kid as bait to draw out the Wasp Apostles, already showing that he's teetering on the edge of morally justifiable actions. In the wake of this play, the Wasps return to their child form, and realizing the optics of standing in front of a barn full of burning corpses of the village's children, Guts goes on to take another child hostage. After he gets out of the town, he releases her and apologizes. While this hardly undoes the dodgy activities perpetrated, there's a clear ounce of remorse, filled by the fact that after the light dies, he protects her from the demons as well. This protective complex feeds into the question of Guts' true feelings, and his tumultuous moral foundation underlying it all. Already, this is pretty shaky ground to start off on. Guts' actions are calculated, but they're hardly virtuous, and this is merely the beginning. Once we reach the Misty Valley, Guts burns that forest to the fucking ground. And we're faced with an absolute demon who is so consumed by the violent development of the story that it's genuinely worth asking if he's in the right. These elves wreak havoc upon surrounding villages, decimating livestock and literally eating people. Also, left to their own devices, these little wasp creatures have come to tear each other apart and do some other activities that aren't exactly befitting of children. That being said, Guts didn't see any of these moments. No, the uncomfortable reality we're faced with here is that there is no definitive right action, and Guts is operating with less evidence, which paints him in an even darker light. These children know not what they do, evidenced by the fact that they seemingly think they're just playing adult. This is a great example of violence seeding violence in the world of Berserk. This is the true visage of adulthood, violence permeating in normalized abhorrent behavior. Meanwhile, our hero Guts is doing the same, contributing to that cycle, an equally broken adult. Still, when he has to fit the fatal blow, driving the Dragon Slayer straight through the head elf, he misses Jill, despite making it clear he'd kill her if he saw her again. Despite how banged up he is, a sword that big has to be deliberately aimed in order not to cause collateral damage. Time and time again, in the burning forest, Guts acts against his word, protecting this little girl standing in his way. Only in the very last moment is this again undone, when Jill throws herself in the way of Guts' blade to protect her friend, who lies bleeding out under the night sky. In that moment, if not for a stray crossbow bolt, it's unclear whether Guts would have cut through the little girl to achieve his end goal. This fosters an atmosphere of troubling decisions. There is no clear answer what is just. The difference in quality between the ambiguity that permeates through this arc versus the outright confusion of internal meaning within the Mothership arc of Gantz is night and day. Even in the twilight of this arc, where Guts has some redemption, it's swathed in the darkness of the world. The most brilliant depiction of this is when Guts wraps Jill up in his cloak after protecting her from demons, a calming dark force amidst the storm, but a harbinger of violence nonetheless. Guts exists as a self-contradiction, and it really begs the question of if the fight he's still pushing through will one day be worth it, or if his soul will implode before then. In a final bold action, Guts protects Jill by pushing her away from his own path of darkness. Even in the virtue of that action, was saving one little girl who wasn't an apostle a sign of hope for him? Or was it simply a coincidence of how the situation found itself resolved? Where Berserk provokes an interesting question about the implications of violence, Gantz steps on its own toes and provides conflicting and confounding viewpoints. This violence that reverberates through Berserk is consuming and intriguing from the beginning of the story. The visuals parallel across decades of in-world and real-life time, reinforcing their own power both symbolically and literally. The arm cannon is an awe-inspiring tool, and it only exists because of a disgustingly violent self-inflicted wound. You know, your favorite MC. They might got a pistol, but got stick is way bigger. He calls it KKK, cause his choppa hate Catholics. Violence builds out internal meaning in Berserk in a powerful and consistent way. The foundation for the storytelling has always been violence, and it's a present character that finds itself anywhere from minor aesthetic decisions all the way up to difficult moral quandaries. While upon first look, violence can be gripping and intense, it also reveals itself as tragic and haunting. The facade lifting reveals the power of Berserk. Succumbing to the allure of this violence, whether you be the audience or Guts, will give way to the degradation of your soul. And more on that in Chapter 5. Alright, time for the moment I pined for writing this entire script. I finally get to bully Gantz. Gantz manages to completely undermine one of its only good points, the chaotic structure and death. Because why the fuck should I care about any of the characters? At first glance, Gantz seems to capture a similar power to Gurren Lagann, in that it establishes a relative character in death. That might seem counterintuitive because the character established is an empty one, but at first glance it works. However, where Gurren Lagann utilized the double fake-out once with Kamina in a really powerful little moment and then once again wrapped up its story with the same double fake-out, sealing internal meaning consistently, Gantz's character of death shot itself in the fucking kneecaps from the jump. That emptiness prevents a lot of meaningful developments in the story from feeling earned or consistent. Despite inconsistency, Oku still jury-rigs unfitting development after unfitting development into his narrative, akin to a petulant child screaming, "They want more." Gantz missions are reminiscent of the Eclipse in Berserk. Both are closed-area death games, overseen by an omnipotent hand. It almost feels like Oku went and read Berserk and said, wow, the Golden Age was by far the best. And to be fair, he'd have an argument there. It's a pretty phenomenal arc. And then said, the Golden Age arc is great because, wow, the Eclipse hits so hard. It's raw and upsetting in a way that nothing else really captures, which, fair, it's brilliantly executed, climaxing years of emotional and narrative buildup, which in the hands of a lesser artist would be contrived, gratuitous, and that absolutely hammers the emotional tragedy of the entire story. And then Oku said, so let's just make all of Gantz the Eclipse all the time. Screw everything that happens before the Eclipse, because that takes too long to get to the good part. Just keep having eclipses. Yeah, I wonder what could go wrong there, dog. Looking at Gantz, you can realize it suffers a complete neglect of character setup and proper time to care for tragedies that will ensue. While the violence does provoke some interesting philosophical consideration in a reflection of human character, it has a sub-zero ability of providing any further impact on me because few of these characters had a chance to develop. At face value, you might think that's fine, and that just provoking an abstract idea of emotional confusion and emptiness is a pretty effective emotion to evoke. You might believe that it doesn't need to do anything more, and you know what? You'd be right. If this was the extent of Gantz's content, it would serve as a perfectly inoffensive question, probing the true quality of the human spirit. The problem is that Gantz is very fucking long, and in that runtime it decides that it's going to venture out past its one interesting thematic development and try to be meaningful. Unfortunately, again, Gantz has effectively handicapped itself, narratively, by eliminating much of the ability for narrative development to occur, as it's opted for a monster of the weak type nature. Coupled with its tendency to murder characters out of the blue to be different and reinforce the meaninglessness, and you slowly realize, oh, this narrative has no fucking idea what it's doing. This is a problem of violence as a chaotic, entropic, and dare I say, nihilistic force. That entropy has the consequence that endless violence will have to provoke more situations that will inevitably burn brighter and louder. Out of that necessity, you get one of the worst parts of Gantz, and that's really saying something, because this is Gantz. About halfway through the narrative, one of the main characters decides to dress up in blackface and commit a mass shooting. Again, this is a byproduct of constantly increasing the violence within your narrative. There's almost a compulsive need to evoke more and more shock, and in terms of that, congratulations, Oku, you managed to move the threshold of acceptable so far out of pocket it may never return. On the surface, it's really easy just to refuse to engage with this moment. I won't disagree, it's a lazy and disgusting moment within the narrative. But if you'll allow me, I want to look at the meaning within this moment, and try to decipher it, because I think the only way to truly analyze how despicable it is to actually dissect it. Inherently, I believe the narrative is not endorsing the actions of the character. Quite the opposite.
Izumi is meant to be one of the most despicable characters within the story, and this is supposed to be the reflection of the lengths he's willing to go to return to the world of Gantz. Moreover, it's another plot development where Kei can be forced to feel the weight of another person's blood on his hands. Manipulative and unreasonable as it is to include in the story, the important part to glean is that Izumi is meant to be an equally manipulative character. You're meant to feel that emanate within him. Between these two meanings, you can come to understand that neither the story nor Oku endorse Izumi's actions. From that, you can be aware that Oku is very cognizant that dressing a character up in blackface to perpetuate such a crime is an inherently despicable action. After saying that, I desperately hope Oku didn't just aggressively drink himself into a stupor, fueled by his intense self-hatred for writing Gantz, black back in, see the hate crime he penned to paper, and decided,
yeah, this is a good thing to publish.
In itself, this almost reads like a blatant self-aware criticism of racism and or xenophobia within Japanese culture. Although this is a bit confounded, when in the wake of the shooting, people expect the foreigner to be Chinese or Korean. If Izumi was just trying to hide his identity, bro, couldn't he have just worn a mask? Since this could have been undone by a simple trip to the dollar store to buy an XL tube sock and a pair of scissors, the blackface stuff seems much more out of pocket. Having a black shooter in these circumstances isn't just maliciously racist, it has little to no precedent. If you actually engage with history, wait, what the hell is that?
Hiroya Oku has been smeared by the liberal media and Twitter for the thought crime of telling a true story of Japan and its brilliant characterization. See, in his action of gunning down innocents, the media suspiciously refuses to talk about how Oku is revealing the true, violent manner of the so-called religion of peace, Shintoism. The media never wants to talk about how gangster hip-hop culture has permeated through every inch of our lives and poisoned our youth, so they are motivated to sag their pantaloons and gaslight me on Twitter. One such man misinterpreting this truth is Mao-adjacent Corbynista and alleged Brighton hotel bombing suspect Super Eye Patch Wolf, who virtue signals through a soitastic display of disgust, not engaging with this brilliant social critique. Terrorism relies on motive. This man did not kill people motivated by color or creed, and for that, we cannot call it terrorism. Unlike instances in which Christians are killed, which the media interestingly never talks about. Contrary to those liberal Marxist hit pieces, the story shows a virtuous man who disguises himself by painstakingly covering every inch of his face with black paint in order to remove the glorification of mass shooters we too often see the liberal media pour all over these soy-sententious fake news broadcasts. Moreover, since this proud young man was patriotically attempting to return to the front line as a last line of defense for all of humanity, it was but a means to an end. Who could begrudge this courageous soldier who is simply trying to defend his homeland from the horde of Islamist alien refugees from instituting Sharia law?
Alright, Paul, that's enough. Considering Japan's complete rigid enforcement of laws, the idea that a foreigner, let alone a black foreigner, would come to shoot Shinjuku up is just foolish. Since it's so hyperbolic, it comes off as edgy for sure, but it seems like it could be a critique of the culture. This is what I would say, noting again that this section is incredibly manipulative and not justified. It simply has a narrative read that sort of potentially could make it make sense. But literally even my charity and analysis is completely invalidated. Izumi's slaughter triggers a mission where we're introduced to some actual black men in the world of Gantz, and they are some of the most moronic, stereotypical depictions of black men that could have possibly been penned to paper. I get the dialogue might have been lost in translation to English, especially with the scans.
Still, I have to share this one brilliantly Kino line.
White boy.
Come on. He's fucking Japanese. Look, as willfully obstinate as I am, I'm well aware this is probably not the direct translation. Still, I'd hazard a guess that the translators were motivated to take this liberal approach in meaning due to the context of the character's establishment. Still, even if we want to dismiss all of the translations directly,
these characters' only major purpose is to serve as cannon fodder for the vampires. Side note, vampires bad. Out of this, the black characters don't serve to suggest Oku has a hidden nuanced perspective on race, furthering the idea that the Shinjuku slaughter was in fact horribly poor taste manipulative nonsense. So considering this, let me throw a galaxy brain suggestion out. Maybe one arc after your horribly sketchy mass murder in blackface,
Just don't include more black characters. That might leave you with a bit more ambiguity and more of an argument for meaning in your narrative. I'd obviously also suggest that we might just nix the whole shooting in general, but this is Oku, so I'm not holding my breath.
You misunderstand, brother. I am a Sigma male.
$19 Fortnite.
Bitch, come get
Sigma males are strongly motivated individuals with a dark IQ.
You motherfuckers. You motherfuckers. Do not take me. Do not take my fucking breath away, you fucking cancer. Even taking Gantz's Shinjuku arc's potential narrative reads, the Shinjuku shooter section is wholly irredeemable. There are potential relevant criticisms that can be interpreted within it for sure, but ultimately the greatest impact it had is blatant cheap shock value, and it's just not acceptable writing. Unfortunately, any scrap of internal meaning that irredeemable development might have even had was completely cast aside by blatant displays of ignorance immediately after. When it comes down to it, the story's violence manages to develop some interesting ideas, only to completely invalidate those interesting ideas with some bullshit development Oku adds. Shinjuku's just another brick in the wall of a flawed narrative, and well, that's pretty much Gantz in a nutshell. So what does Gantz say about violence? I'd like to say it has a certain malevolent cynicism that is at times bested to reveal a kernel of hope in the human condition, but it's more like an aggressive cancer that slowly spreads across the narrative in random and unproductive developments, stepping on its own dumbass toes. Anyhow, let's draw this chapter to a close discussing what idea Chainsaw Man develops out of violence, namely politics. Politics are ugly. Watch out, content warning. The virtue signaling hippies, about to get political. Look, with that preface, I bet you're expecting me to start dissecting the whole motif of gun control. But that's a can of worms that I don't think I really have the ethos to speak on. Not to mention, it's an issue even I, a virtue signaling dipshit, think is often handled with reductive rhetoric in public discourse. It's really easy to say, guns bad. And to be completely frank, that's how Chainsaw Man reads. Still, I don't want to minimize that I think the motif speaks on real pain, especially with Inaki's character. There are seriously interesting ideas dissected there. Emotionally, that is. In fact, that emotional power is what makes the other political angle of the story so voracious. The politics beckon back to the flame metaphor within Chainsaw Man, most specifically the oxygen I mentioned earlier. Honestly, if not for this one reason, I think the fuel and oxygen would be pretty interchangeable. After all, blood is almost the oxygen that keeps the violence breathing throughout the various violent conflicts of the narrative. The reason that Denji persistently vying to live, whether it be food, shelter, or just any fight he gets into, is the oxygen for violence is because this is the reality of the situation. See, the political message that speaks to me in Chainsaw Man is that of the classist inequality that warps Denji into the emotionally stunted individual he is. Nowhere is this apathy better seen than in Denji's introspection over the ideas of losing various companions he has throughout the narrative, where he realizes he probably wouldn't actually be that emotionally impacted by any of their deaths, and would continue to go on living. Even if the girl he pedestalizes as the love of his life were to kick the bucket, Denji would go on living. I think this is an incredibly powerful moment within the story for me for one main reason. It's not written in such a way that you have to feel like this is an acceptable way of thinking. In fact, you definitely shouldn't, but it exemplifies the indoctrination within poverty to fetishize the bare minimum. With that being said, I think if I were to have a conversation with Denji, in this reality Denji is real, or maybe I'm a manga character. Either way, pretty cool. Doesn't really matter though. If I were to attempt to have a conversation with Denji about how his circumstances were so unfortunate, and that him being a member of the underclass has perpetually cursed him to live wanting naught but for the bare necessities, he'd probably tell me to shut the fuck up, and that he has all the bread and jam he could ever want.
And that'd be his prerogative to say. It's true to his character, but after all, he is a fictional character. That's why I want to cut aside any niceties or pity I could have, and instead applaud Fujimoto for crafting an empathetic perspective on a negative byproduct of a capitalist society that hijacks the underclass, allowing the hierarchy to survive.
The irony is not lost on me that I'm wasting months of my life scripting this project about some cartoons I really enjoyed staring at because words have become too hard to focus on in long strings, and dedicating months of my life is a privilege that divorces me of really being able to say I can fully understand the pain Denji faces. By the same token, my distance from that reality allows me to say that I cannot, and moreover Chainsaw Man says that we should not, be surprised by the violence that comes out of this rewiring of the underclass in a late-stage capitalist hellscape.
I could have my good buddy Paul Joseph Watson come back and wax poetic about how Denji had a deadbeat father and no mother, which shows a degradation in the familial unit, being the cause of all this utter chaos. As tempted as I am to segue off here into an unrelated rant bashing neocon grifters for their obfuscation in order to maintain the unequal status quo, that would be a bit of a slap in the face against the spirit of Chainsaw Man. See, within the story, the late-stage capitalist critique in and of itself isn't what makes Chainsaw Man interesting. The true prize of this development is that the emotional paradigm it sets up is honest and raw, which primes you to sympathize with characters as their struggles seem well-founded and painful. Much like I'd hope that some dipshit making a YouTube video wouldn't be able to unilaterally change your entire political perspective, so too do I find the argument that Chainsaw Man is valuable because it's political quite weak. The politics themselves are banal, straightforward, and simple criticisms that should be pretty logically sound, but also don't provide that much rhetorical value. Late-stage capitalism bad is a pretty fair assessment, but it hardly outlines a salient solution to the problem presented. And that's because that's not the fucking point of Chainsaw Man, and it really shouldn't be the point of this video either. Herein and within my analysis, capitalist consequences need only provide a context out of which tragedy ensues and real emotional damage is rendered out. That aligns Chainsaw Man as one of the realer and more emotionally grounded stories I've read, even when most of the story can be utterly ridiculous. Out of this emotional honesty, other problems Denji faces become illuminated. One such limitation in his character's development out of the underclass is pretty obvious from the get-go. Poor people who escape poverty often can't acclimate correctly, because the divide from absolute poverty to livable is an existential shift. Changes in living circumstances after being conditioned to another state for so long is jarring and painful. Here's a completely unrelated photo of Ben Shapiro in a cowboy hat. Point is, poor people who come into wealth still have to live with the ghost image of poverty affecting every moment of their life. It's not like an acquisition of wealth undoes years of psychological damage living in poverty, nor the conditioned tendencies and habits of living within that poverty. That's why Denji is an absolute emotional mess who has no appreciation for human life when he comes to finally understand the bare minimum. He loves toast and jam because it's a luxury, and he could want nothing more. But why would the abstract value of life matter all that much for him, when he was literally saddled with so much debt that it basically reflected negative self-worth upon his character? It's heartbreaking characterization that is real and fair, as a character who comes to rationalize a lot of his reality through pain, and violence is his truth.
This is exactly the problem with social justice warriors trying to proselytize with a didactic-based...
No, we're not doing that again.
Enough of my faux socialist black belt. It's time to summarize. See, the really heartbreaking thing is that beyond the structural inequality that brought Denji to this mental purgatory, he's a kid. This is ultimately a story about a young man learning to contend with his hormones, which is coincidentally the reason a friend recommended Chainsaw Man to me, based on my love for Fooly Cooly. You met him earlier, but shout out my buddy Bonk. The hormonal emotional state Denji finds himself in allows him to be a lot more pliant, and homie gets manipulated. A lot. That manipulation generally emanates out of a pretty common motif, one we're going to delve into a lot more in the next chapter.
But in a word, it's the spark.
Sex was the one wish Denji thought of when he could want nothing more than to be out of debt. It was his pipe dream. Ha, we're too funny. You'll see this all over the place. But the really unfortunate thing is that sex completely conditioned itself to his economic salvation in Makima. This is why the moment where Makima makes Denji your pet in the beginning of the story is so powerful. It's an immediate association that forms in Denji's head. At the tail end of the story, right before Denji resurges in a moment of pure self-actualization, out of the mentally binding spell that has been cast by this alluring devil, comes one of the most brutal moments in the story. Power rules. She's seriously such an amazing character in how utterly dumb she is, and how throughout the entire course of the narrative, she becomes a truly endearing character. She's a great reflection of the pure id within Denji, and that's what makes her exodus all the more heartbreaking. When Denji succumbs to his apathetic resignation after Aki's death, he breaks, and the oxygen of his own self-preservation starts to weigh upon him. He can no longer breathe. Symbolically, this is gestured so well by the fact that food no longer tastes good to Denji, peaking in a nice ironic dub he takes from that popsicle stick. Again, speaking from the general story structure, this is the change Denji's been on course for throughout the entire story. He's been destined to realize that this simple persistence is meaningless, and that just continuing to live through violence isn't much of a life. But we need to take one step back before we get there. Enter Makima. In his emptiness, Denji falls back on that initial association of existential salvation, into Makima. Again, this hinges on political associations mentioned earlier. But on its own, it's also kind of an alluring idea, resigning oneself and alleviating all pain. While I never lived with blood on my hands as a young man, I did feel the weight of the world on my shoulders at one point, and there were people I should not have trusted who I turned to, who therein sunk me in even deeper. You can't run away, and that's what Power's death symbolizes. Makima is symbolically and narratively the source of Denji's pain. This initial spark of violence burned bright, fed by the oxygen of wanting to subsist, and what was initially a violence that enraptured us as an audience, that we saw forge Denji into a thriving human being with a family, is now an unwieldy fire that consumes anything in its path. I genuinely broke down when Power died. It was the first time in a bloody story where I couldn't take it anymore. Some of those tears were probably for Aki, although the full tragedy of his death didn't fully hit me until the aftershock of power. Props to Fujimoto. I had become desensitized similarly to Denji, all through the effect of his writing. So what does Chainsaw Man say about violence? Chainsaw Man says that it's ugly, and arguably all three of these narratives do. But the true ugliness of Chainsaw Man is that at one point I was bewitched by this violence and thought it could actually be a beneficial and desirable attribute within the story that I could enjoy. That violence seemed so divorced from reality and its cartoonish nature, until it came to reveal itself as a damn close reflection of real life. Chapter 1 of this video is by far the most important framework, because all three of these stories color themselves with foundational violence. Regardless of how well each story manages to appropriate violence, they all have a major constant within the motif. Violence isn't a self-contained element. It permeates throughout a story, contaminating and informing every development. Now, we'll steer right into the skid of the biggest taboo violence tangos with. It's an association we don't typically like to acknowledge as reality. Let's talk about sex.
You are but a phoenix among feathers. You're broken by the waves among the sea. They hope that you die, they hope that you wash away. But you swim as well as you fly. Pretty little bird, pretty little bird.
The most beautiful things in life tend to have the greatest capacity for utter tragedy. If I had to make a list of the most beautiful things in life, sex would rank high. But a guy who makes videos about Japanese cartoons isn't exactly a reliable source, so let's just be objective and give Watch Mojo another test to see what they said. Alright, top 10 most beautiful things. Well, sex is number 2. Interesting. I wonder what number 1 is.
Okay, what the f?
Chainsaw Man is a masterclass exploration in sexual dynamics as a young man. Fundamentally, the paradigm of sex is foundational to the entire violent framework. The setup of the spark in Chapter 1 establishes the potential pain and the innate desire for it. That desire is strong, and it's what makes Denji a realized character, albeit a simple one. The best way I can explain my love for Chainsaw Man and its handling of sex works on 3 levels. On level 1, the surface, we're met with a simple desire. Denji wants to cut straight through the pitcher's mound to second base. On its surface, this desire to touch some titty is a simple yet effective one, and it draws you into the story. It's hilariously straightforward, but of course, the narrative's genius lies in many places within its twists. So let's talk about level 2. Here we get what the intellectuals in the room like to call ironic nuance. See, Denji's grand desire is just that of a humble man wishing to touch some booba, but them booba tend to be attached to evil women who will betray him. Level 2 says, toxic relationships bad. And to give the story credit here, the first 2 layers do a brilliant job obscuring one another at times when they absolutely need to. When Denji seems like he's being manipulated once again, we're met with another inciting incident of a potential pair o-opai he can grasp at, and once again our attention is manipulated away from manipulation. Likewise, when the curtain is pulled, we see the twist of tits being attached to women betraying Denji. Whether this be a simple gag, like him feeling up a stuffed bra on a clogged toilet, or even the biggest twist of the series, where the girl of his dreams turns out to be a sadistic demon herself, who doesn't care about him at all the twists in expectations base themselves on the deceit of layer 1. While the lighthearted betrayals of expectations are executed by rather lovable characters like Power or Himeno, the serious betrayals of the story are perpetrated by cold-hearted, evil women. They are women who wish nothing but to get what they want out of Denji, to use him. They don't seem to have much depth below this. They spin him around their fingers with ease, and seemingly toss him out when he's of no more use.
I admit it, another hole got me finished, broke my heart, oh no you didn't.
So this depiction of women, it's really bad. I'm sorry if I led you on. I know I was building this section of betrayals and twists up as though it was a phenomenal part of the narrative, and on its surface it is, but if you look deeper, there's a lot of mediocrity at play with character writing. Simply put, simplicity is fine. That's why I love Denji, but reductivity isn't. Some messages can come across ambiguously when you write major romantic interests as cold-hearted women who just want to use you throughout the narrative.
Fuck sipping, I'ma down a whole bottle, hard liquor, hard truth can't swallow.
Let me tell you a story. When I was in 8th grade, there was this girl Gina in my Japanese class, and she put my no mustache have an ass on emotional tilt. Homegirl used to laugh at all my jokes, which is basically all a self-obsessed toolbag of a middle schooler needs to fall for a girl. Anyway, one day she asks if I play Assassin's Creed, and I go, hubba da gamer girl, and also yes. And she asks me if I've played Revelations, and I say yes, I own it. And she asks me, can I borrow it? And I say, of course, girl of my dreams, we will be married soon anyhow. Why must we keep our possessions separated? What's mine is yours, queen. Anyhow, that was right before summer break. The summer she graduated middle school. The summer she never returned any of my texts. And never gave me that game back.
And that's why everything I said about Chainsaw Man just now was completely wrong. Women are fucking evil creatures who just want to use you, and any other dimensions they show are fake and lies to deceive and manipulate you. And goddamn it, Gina, I don't even know if my 360 works anymore, but give me back my game. It was a present from my parents, you fucking bitch. And then, I was no longer 13, and I saved a whole lot of time by not playing a terrible dogshit game. I also met a lot more women, and most of them didn't play video games, so that removed the potential for them to steal them. But aside from that, I came to realize that my distrust of women was probably quite unfounded and immature. With that being said, I've been hurt a lot in my past, and I can completely empathize with Fujimoto's writing of Makima and the Bomb Devil for this reason. It's very easy to see their character depth not as an actual representation of fully realized characters, but as characters conceived out of Fujimoto's perspective. To clarify, that's basically to say that when you read Makima, it is okay that she's not a fully realized character, because more than anything, that tells you a story about Fujimoto, which is equally interesting. To cite my sources, H. Bomber Guy summarized this dynamic really well in his analysis of The Room, where he ostensibly noted that much of that movie can be seen as Tommy Wiseau's understanding of women, and how when his partner in that movie is painted as such a cold-hearted evil lech, maybe that's genuinely what Tommy Wiseau thinks women are like. It reveals an inherent aspect of the way we view partners, with the tendency to perform memory bias in such a way that we can reconcile our events so we were the actual victim. It's the so-called crazy ex-girlfriend syndrome, which so many men seem to parrot in the wake of breakups. Now, with this fully realized understanding of perspective and narrative, we can analyze evil women as an extension of how Fujimoto might view relationships. This guides us to the genius. To the more tenacious of those of you watching, you might have remembered that there is in fact a third layer we've yet to discuss. There's a reason I consider Chainsaw Man the good in handling sex of the three narratives at hand. So my lovely audience, it's time for your second black pill. In beginning to read Chainsaw Man, one of two reactions are elicited. Either one, you see Makima bite Denji's finger and think, damn, that's kinda weird, but aight, chief. Or two, you see Makima bite Denji's finger, and your brain lights the fuck up like Windows XP pinball. Under the surface of the banal message that toxic relationships bad, you find something quite interesting. Fujimoto's deepest message about sex. Masochism is based. Citing the Evil Bird app, the most reliable and trusted source on the planet, we find a collection of anecdotes that are in Japanese, and most of them are in kanji. Strangely, kanji pertaining to masochism was not a portion of my middle school nor high school syllabus. So I guess I'll have to trust this quote tweet summary at face value. This tells a story that during uni, our lovable rascal Fujimoto was once bullied by a woman who found it quite entertaining to flip his bike over and laugh in his face. And our homie Fujimoto, well, he found that quite hot. According to the tweet, it seems our main man has a disposition towards controlling overbearing women. Again, I say to you, dear viewer, that's based. Now, to be fair, limiting Chainsaw Man to one kink is, there's dominance, pet play, blood play, cannibalism, people want to fuck the car. Anyway, yeah, point is, it encompasses a lot of sexual dynamics. Probably some more inspired by the fandom, but more than anything, that freaky deaky cocktail of the ways cock chases tail feel well conceived out of Fujimoto's strangeness. Look, comparatively to times past, we live in a relatively sex-positive society. While I'm not the biggest proponent of flaunting your kinks out like a peacock flexes its feathers, it doesn't mean that the underlying honesty isn't valuable in my eyes. If you can take your kink and use it to build out an interesting story, more power to you. With a bike flipping anecdote, I'm inclined to see a self-insert of Fujimoto within Denji. Like I saw it as unconscious in Layer 2, with issues of one-note female characters being reflective of his perspective. However, as the self-insert becomes more contextually fitting, you can start to see a bit of the nuance in this perspective. The kink of Layer 3 recontextualizes the layers above. Within clear boundaries, understanding, and mutual respect, kink is a beautiful thing. With that being said, I'm about to make some rather critical remarks about the potential negativity of kink without emotional reciprocity. Rather than demonize casual sex categorically, this section serves to explain how dangerous it is without an underlying maturity that only comes with experience. Rather than suggest, Chainsaw Man is a directed critique of any number of kinks or sexual dynamics when they're handled with care, the story intentionally hones in on dynamics where, void of deeper love, things go horribly wrong. That without awareness and care, sex can be hijacked and wrought with painful consequences. Denji's life is chock full of feelings of worthlessness, and a domineering partner with sinister intention comes to fetishize his trauma. It's clear why Denji's so drawn to Makima. She's magnetic and toxically charming. and that personality clicks well with his urges. It allows her to control him, and he submits. While on the second level, this plays into her one-note nature as a character. On this level, you can begin to appreciate Makima as more of a symbolic force. The situation is more than just toxic relationships bad, because inserting a borderline sociopath as one of the players, and then claiming this is representative of a typical toxic relationship, is a hyperbolic case study. The same's true for sex. The unfortunate aspect of both these deeply beautiful acts is that incredibly kind, caring people can inflict incredible pain on one another, without necessarily being evil. Ignorance, willful or not, is often just as dangerous. Makima is sex and toxic relationships incarnate, because she exists as the inherent danger hiding in each of them. Rather than being a fully realized character, and a reductive depiction of women in general. On the third level, Makima is practically the embodiment of a sexual urge. At first, the kink's thrill is a magnetic feeling to Denji, and it primes him to suit her bidding. It lets Denji ride a dark wave in a hauntingly beautiful way. But as they say, all good things in moderation. In excess, even the most beautiful things in life become crippling vices. Watchmojo's second most beautiful thing in the world can be pretty dangerous. It remains true for relationships as well, and grasps at something unique to both. Without a deeper understanding that bases itself in inherent maturity, intimate endeavors can be deeply painful. Fujimoto contextualizes this in the idea of love, a deeper connection and commitment to another person that requires a great deal of energy. And to be truly kind and good to someone you love, you have to be constantly mindful and empathetic in a way that forces you to grow up. Makima is broken. She doesn't provide Denji with any deeper love, which spurs the toxic relationship of Layer 2. But Layer 3 rationalizes this lack of love. It serves to show the potential pain without love in any relationship or sexual encounter. More than a unilateral criticism of women, so too does Layer 3 recontextualize Layer 1. See, tits in and of themselves are a vapid intrigue. So when Makima says it's best to have someone who understands you to participate in such intimate acts with, to a degree, she's right. It's really amazing to find someone who can tickle that deep repressed desire that you might have crawling around your id. By the same token, simply understanding these kinks without any deeper love for the person with them is a heartless experience. And while it's deeply stimulating, it's burning the candle out at both ends. Layer 1 and 2 both have a truth. Loveless vapidity in sexual relationships burns you. And as a young man, the innate desire to explore sexuality is dangerous. That pain can cause you to fundamentally hate a person and reduce them to a pure visage of evil in your brain. So too does Fujimoto depict the women who manipulate Denji throughout the story. And while I think it still may evoke the same old crazy ex-girlfriend trope, that tired cliche sources from real pain. I think it's important to accept that it's okay to be hurt. Trying to deny a reality that sex can hurt only promises to burden you with dissonance and unhappiness. So be kind to yourself, and let it burn for a while. The pain burns brighter because the intimacy that's so utterly beautiful is also a well of misery. It's impossible to reconcile the two. They simply exist as forces in your brain, immutable. The clashing feeling of loving and hating someone who I've shared intimate moments with is probably the most painful thing I've experienced in my time on this planet. And Chainsaw Man orchestrates this feeling, on every goddamn level. Perhaps the reason I find Chainsaw Man the quote-unquote the good of sex is that while it's relatively simple, the story reflects a true vulnerability for young men in the domain of sex. In a culture that socialized me to chase after as many tits as humanly possible, and to hold having sex as a point of pride, a narrative I heard far less often than I should have was that this shit could hurt, and that it was allowed to. The other reason Chainsaw Man is the quote-unquote good of sex is because Makima is best girl, you dumb coward bitch. Moving on and ripping the band-aid clean off. Ladies and gentlemen, the bad. When it comes to sex, Gantz is... Look, I reread Gantz for this video, and it still left me a bit shell-shocked. So I want to give Oku a chance. Maybe he was actually diving into a deeply nuanced perspective on sex, and I just need to give some of his other work a shot to understand his unorthodox approach. In an attempt to maintain full intellectual honesty, let's do a deep dive into another of Oku's works, and use it as a general foil for Gantz. Okay, what's this one about? Oh, old guy with a dog. Well, sure hope there's no major themes of sex within this one. Then again, Gantz ain't giving me much hope. Anyway, not that one. Ooh, how about this one? Hen, huh?
Despite the title, Hen is not hentai. It does have sex, strong language, yuri, and other elements that might make you think hentai.
Well, now we get to talk about Hen. See, Hen is...
So fucking awful! Oku, what the fuck is wrong with you?
Hen is embedded with about as little nuance and respect for a sexual orientation or dynamic that exists within a narrative that I've seen. In Hen, our main character is a girl, but when she was younger, her parents made her dress like a boy. Except, maybe they didn't actually do that, because the plot point is left with ambiguity. See, her fucky past's validity hinges on whether or not some random fucker claiming to be her long-lost brother is telling the truth. Homie, the potential brother of MC-chan, found her crush on the side of the street. Oh, and he made a joke that he was going to sexually assault said crush in an alleyway. Again, first time meeting her, remember? Only after this brilliant setup are we privy to the story. Also, apparently he might have been joking. Wait, about being her brother or about the parental abuse? Anyway, our ambiguous past force trans boy, now girl. Wow, we're getting off to a really respectful start here, Oku. Well, she's lesbian, except not for all girls, just one girl, because that is in fact how lesbians work. But that girl likes this guy, and that guy likes our MC. So, love triangle. Except that love triangle falls apart when the guy falls for MC Sean's crush, because Oku is a masterclass deconstructionist. See, love triangles are so cliche. What you should do is build that tension up for all of 10 chapters, then completely break it without any clear reason why. Just go ahead and totally trash a development in your plot for no clear reason. This, folks, is what we call good writing. You know, love triangles, they suck. Just fold it out into a straight line and have each edge pull at the middle.
Wait, shit, this is actually making Oku look like he's doing something.
Well, anyway, now the name of the game is vying for Crush Chan's love. So obviously, MC Chan's plans are to get the guy in her way shit-faced drunk. Why? Because underage drinking is taboo in Japan, and Oku's got hit blackout on taboo bingo. Did I mention that Oku has a 6th grader blow his load all over MC Chan's tits? Yeah, Oku likes pushing boundaries. We could call him a revolutionary. Anyway, back to this girl date raping. Yeah, forgot to mention, that's why they're drunk. Well yes, anyway, back to her date raping her crush's crush to fuck, what will this even achieve? Anyway, when he's passed out, she strips him bare naked. Oh, and this guy's got a huge cock. Because of course he does. He's short like Oku. How do I know Oku is short even though his height isn't posted anywhere on the internet? His literal self-insert, as in the character named Hidoroya Oku in Hen, yes, he literally self-inserted, is even shorter. Anyway, MC-chan, who's got a weird attachment from sex because that's a convenient way to paint her as a lesbian, yeah, she fucks him while he's unconscious, which is already beyond fucked, but it's no big deal to her, she just comes. What? And then, does she do anything with that development? Does she use it to manipulate her crush to make her hate him? Nope, nothing. This happens for no apparent fucking reason. Nothing comes of it, nobody ever talks about it ever again. Was that not enough to convince you that this story has no idea what the fuck it's doing? How about a few volumes later when Oku decides it's an interesting narrative progression to have a 6th grader blow his load all over her tits? Okay, I already mentioned that. But did I mention the part where that same 6th grader handcuffs her to a bed to try to go in full measure? Why does that happen? Beats me! See, thing is, I thought Gantz was bad. I had to turn my brain off to read it. But in order to accurately get a secondary perspective on Oku's views on sex, I wanted to turn to the man's magnum opus for his magnum dong. Well, fuck this shit. It shows you Oku's best attempt to write a female main character amounts to him giving her no personality and malformed milk jugs. He also clearly decided to throw every sexual taboo and every thinkable iteration at a wall hoping a single concept would stick, and spoiler alert, nothing fucking does. Even that love triangle deconstruction dynamic I mentioned earlier, that could have been interesting, falls apart. After a while, the third corner of that triangle, the guy Crush Chan likes, well, he just fucks off to America, and the plot forgets what its purpose is. It's then that Oku decides that it's a good development to dangle the fact the main character might have AIDS in front of our faces. And then, get this, turns out she doesn't, and that doesn't go anywhere. Ooh, maybe it'd be cool to have a random earthquake happen where she might die. You know, 2 chapters after she's been cleared of her diagnosis of fucking AIDS. Anyway, that doesn't matter, because she meets this dude who's so hot, and she might be into him, but get this, he's also gay. You know, I call Hen based because it's actively embracing gayness all over the place. Except it's done with no sensitivity, and in a crime worse than bigotry, it's fucking boring. I spent the entire plot of Hen asking what the fuck is happening, and I came to the realization that maybe Oku doesn't know what he's doing. So with Oku's clearly respectful and controlled tone and restraint when it comes to sexual matters, let's turn to Gantz and see how just beautifully he paints this innately human desire. Gantz is in fact very bad. It's just awful. Hen is worse, but Hen should not be the standard by which any human being should even begin to compare stories for sexual nuance. Look, I'm the biggest proponent of trying to scour meaning out of a deplorable story element, and in Gantz, I feel safe saying there is none. There's a threshold within storytelling where you inundate your narrative with so much absolute nonsense that it's fair for the viewer to no longer elect to look deeper.
While my tolerance is pretty high, Gantz is special. See, when a story decides that the first major beat it's gonna have with a female character is to have her tits fully out when she spawns into Gantz, I can look at that and almost find the objectification kind of bold. It's unconventional and it sticks out as a really strange moment. And then, when you have your main character decide he's gonna make out with this unconscious nude girl, I think, oh, this guy sucks. And in fact he does. So in my head, it almost seems like Oku is setting Kei up to be a completely unlikable character. So yeah, after our main character sexually assaults an unconscious girl, the Yakuza that happen to be in the room decide that she's a prime target and might as well fully do the deed with her in the back. But Kato stops them, which is, well, this plot point basically exists to show you, Kato good, Kei bad. Wouldn't say most of the developments up to now are exactly well written, but the meaning is clear. As of now, we can kind of discern that Oku is trying to show that we live in a dark, dark world. And while it's forced, the point reads. Then Oku decides to have a dog perform cunnilingus on the girl. I need to make this very clear. Not only has Oku lost me on the meaning of what this could possibly be trying to say, he's also disgusted me to the point where I have no urge to try and find that out. It's primed me to immediately care less about any sexual developments in the future of the story, and any internal meaning from earlier in this development is recontextualized as hyperbolic and pointless. This is Gantz in a nutshell. Now we're left with our main incel character Kei. Great sympathetic setup for the protag, by the way, Oku. I don't really care to talk about Gantz much in depth from here on out, so let's just abridge the bullshit and make a greatest hits in Oku's dumbassery. After the first Gantz mission, our main character Kei thinks he's gonna pull that hound's sloppy seconds with female Kei. He buys condoms and a young jump. Nice self-plug of the magazine, by the way, there. Also, nice Freudian association of sex with the manga. Smart stuff there, Oku. You wanna know what's not smart though? Using your stupid computer 3D rendering technique you used to design this manga out to map out female Kei's pussy popping from the back when she's bathing. I guess they really needed to set up that sexualization here to help with the subversive gag that she's not actually gonna bang him, so he can debate forcing her to. Really setting up Kei as a great sympathetic protagonist once again, Oku. Oh, but as female Kei says, you don't have sex with your pets. Could've fooled me, Gantz. Doesn't take but a chapter later for Oku to introduce us to the first black character of his masterpiece, Onizuka, a big black hoppa who wants to pipe some men down in a school bathroom without their consent. Yep, that's a character. I think it's also of note to say that this is not the only instance in the story where students force themselves on other men in the school bathroom. Before Gantz, I was only used to such tropes out of the context of prison movies. But hey, maybe I'll give Oku some credit, and imagine Homie was trying to paint school as though it were a prison in Japanese society. I'll tell you what though, if that's the case, I sure wish he'd be locked up for a while so he could learn how to fucking write. But Oonga Boonga, there's full-on sex in the story, and they aired it on TV, what? Opinion time. I think the proliferation of hentai across the internet is, well, stupid. But I won't begrudge anyone who enjoys it on their own time. But if you're gonna include sex outside of porn, say an anime. Maybe make it have some sort of symbolic or thematic point. I'm not some prude who thinks sex shouldn't be included, or even think that it should only be portrayed in some tasteful way. But at least make it have some purpose. Because I don't see the inherent value in the first sex scene in Gantz. Why does Kei get laid here? Because he's sad. And a girl thinks he's cute for crying. So he tells her to have sex with him. And she calls him her and then she fucks him. I'm aware this is probably more rough because of the specific translation of the scan that I was reading. But honestly, the edge of the bit was the only thing that I found remotely interesting. This is legitimately one of the dumbest portrayals of a character losing their virginity. And had I only read Gantz, I might have subscribed to the idea Oku is setting this scene up to flesh out the idea of people trying to reconcile their emotions within a dark, lonely world. In fact, the gal's response in the midst of them doing that deed affirms that theme. Unfortunately, I've read Hen now, and I've come to a clear realization. Oku is a horny motherfucker, and he realized the closest thing to sex in his narrative to that point was the MC tugging his pee-pee. After reading Hen, I'm less inclined to find it anything less than insipid and pointless. I don't see value. This girl seems to be in love with Kei, for some reason, and therefore she wants to date him. By this arc's end, Kei's telling her the only reason he liked her is because she put out. At most, this only reaffirms that our main character is despicable, which again I don't think is a point that Gantz should be prided for. And then she dies, and matters to Kei for a minute actually. And then he gets a girlfriend, and she fades into obscurity. All in all, she's just another example of a concept Oku throws at the wall and simply forgets about. But Gantz is about love, baby. And this finds its way into our relationship between Kei and Tai. As I said, Gantz about the love. And the way that you know Kei loves Tai is because she's not hot. See, it's very difficult to portray true love in a narrative. Oftentimes, such an intimate expression is lost on viewers without a deft touch. But Oku, in all his genius, cracked the code. The solution is just to make sure that your audience is aware that the love interest is not hot, and therefore there must be some true motive of pure agape in this biatch. See Oku. He lays this foundation methodically. He starts with her introduction, where Kei is forced to ask her, the weird otaku girl, out as a punishment for losing a board game. See, she's weird, and since Oku drew her with a bit of baby fat, which is under no circumstances ever cute on girls, she is very not attractive. Therefore, when Kei saves her a few chapters later, from all their classmates being massacred. By the way, guess if this is the last school-related tragedy in Gantz? If you were hoping the answer was no, so are Nishi's classmates. Anyhow, Kei saves Tai from that first scholastic mass murder, and Kei is clearly doing this out of a place of love, as Tai is weird and not a hot girl. And then as everything starts to settle itself down, and Kei has a nice monologue emphasizing that he hasn't bothered to get to know this girl better at all, homie dicks her down. This is her role after all, as an uninspiring looking 6 out of 10 at best. 10 chapters later, we're reminded of Tai's uselessness once again, when Izumi's girlfriend gives Kei a friend's number. This friend of hers, she's got F-cups, and she distracts Kurno because she's real hot. But Kurno, he loves his less than pretty girlfriend, and decides he will be with her, and grabs her hand in an act of true devotion to her fugly wuggly ass. Anyhow, a bit later on, this idol Reika appears in the world of Gantz, and she is just gorgeous. And guess who she falls in love with? Our main incel Kei. And I guarantee you, her being hot will be in no way important for the romantic developments to come. Don't worry about that attractive girl for now though, as Kei's ugly duckling minus the duckling girlfriend earns her keep. Tai does the one thing that redeems her homely nature, by swallowing Kurno's load. God bless her and her lack of attractiveness. Worry not though, because just as man has nutted down his girl's throat, the idol Reika shows up on TV, and she's so hot. Okay, I know the whole me bullying Tai for not being hot bit might seem a bit counterproductive, but this is the point in the narrative where it starts to become really prevalent. People start questioning Kei and why he's dating such a mediocre otaku girl. Very subtle writing on Oku's part, because couple that with the temptation of an idol, an extreme desire to use as a juxtaposition to prove Kei's love for Tai, and you're met with such heavy-handed developments that it's hard not to laugh. Look, Tai might have been half chub-inducing at best, but had Gantz been handled subtly, it would have been kind of sweet for our main character to not be given a cliche big-titty anime broad to shack up with by story's end. The problem is Oku beats you over the head with the fact that she's mediocre, and has to repeat,
"Hey, did you realize she's not hot?"
It's really romantic and true love because she's not hot.
And within that redundancy, whatever value could be found within this development is lost. To be fair though, Gantz manages to find reprieve for about 100 chapters from ugly bashing our main gal, because Kei is literally dead. Worry not though, dear viewer, because just as soon as Kei and Tai are reunited, they run into Kei's old middle school bully, who doesn't hesitate to call her a homely broad. Way to return to form, Gantz. Heaven forbid I forget the 100 chapters that you spent bashing Tai before. This gimmick is a shame, because other than that, Tai is an endearing character, and she's one of the only reasons I give two shits about the conclusion of Gantz. Still, the way she's ugly bashed for chapters on end exemplifies Oku's inability to write nuanced romance or sex. Gantz does not lack flaws. It manages to fall on its face in many areas. Oku manages to write sex in such a way that it's pointless at best, and inconsistent at its worst. In Oku's writing, sex is sometimes violent, but the violence is confounding, and it doesn't have any obvious message. In these developments, it seems as though Oku's being edgy to lock the story to a darker tone, which is manipulative and despicable of him. Oku's unclear motivations at times paint Kei as a bit of an indecisive prick, and at the worst, a bit of an incel. Again, this isn't making me sympathetic to the main character, which is to the story's detriment. All in all, in Gantz, sex happens randomly. It's often vapid and empty, sometimes it's dark and evil. With Kei and Tai, it's meant to be sweet, a story of two people finding each other in a meaningless world. However, rather than growing out of that meaninglessness and becoming it all affirming,
through Oku's psychotic horny musings, Gantz falls flat on its face, right back into a whole lot of nothing.
Look, much shame to King Clan Oku and his complete inability to write sex, and props to sex freak Fujimoto for being a weirdo, but their perspective on sex is in a different domain from Berserk.
Chainsaw Man evokes a touching masculine vulnerability, but since it ran in Weekly Shonen Jump, Fujimoto undoubtedly held a lot back.
Since Berserk can go darker, it sometimes hits more carnal ideas, and those resonate tragically. On the other hand, some of Berserk's sexual dynamics are exclusively used for world building. A good deal of that's hard to stomach. It's pretty clear that Gantz wanted to follow in suit of Berserk in that edge. Thing is though, Oku is a dipshit who is incapable of writing nuanced relationships or sexual dynamics, so the edgy shit has no deeper meaning. Again, it's not like Berserk doesn't have its fair share of edgy shit like Gantz, but for the most part, it incorporates it in a rather effective way. I think a great initial comparison would be between Corcus and, what's that guy's name?
Long hair? Fuck it.
Reika-simp.
Corcus and Longhair Simpson are the same character. Both resent their veritable leaders in Guts and K. Corcus is consistent in his character, in that he kinda sucks, but that's okay. His character's purpose is well fleshed out, and he's predictably vindictive. Reika-simp, on the other hand, hardly has any defined character whatsoever other than likes Reika, therefore must dislike Kurano, therefore must want to become the leader, because that must be why Reika likes Kurano.
Now, I don't want to call this straight up plagiarism, but let's just say Oku was never great at the game of telephone as a kid.
When Corcus dies, we get a brief moment of self-reflection on his own part, which renders him sympathetic. Corcus was a dreamer, vapid as his dreams may be. In his last moments, he embraces a naked lady, the visage of his vapid desires, while Homegirl is actually a disguised apostle. And dickhead or no, this is an inherently tragic and twisted scene, and I genuinely feel for Corcus. Even if it's only for a second, it hits, and overall it gives his character lasting weight. When Longhair Simpson gets seduced by an alien like Corcus by the apostle, nothing happens. He pipes down the alien, Reika kills the alien, he survives. This moment is just weird and horny. The scene is a nothing burger. There's no tragedy, it's not an impactful moment, and it doesn't make me sympathize with an unlikable character, like Berserk was able to. Besting Gantz is hardly a high bar in any respect, but Berserk vaults over that bar in strides. From the beginning, sex is woven into the framework of the story of Berserk. It's the first goddamn development. As always, I'm hesitant to say Miura had the entire Odyssey planned out in his head from the jump. This is corroborated by many interviews he's done. Still, opening the first chapter with sex suggests that's going to be a mainstay in the story, and that pain in the scene will persist. Guts' experience with Gambino cements this. His trauma getting taken advantage of as a young kid is a horrifying foundation, but rather than feeling manipulative, Berserk lands this moment. It's a deeply sympathetic development, and it's a valid pretense that's rather empowering to watch him grow from, scarred as he may be. The pain of Guts' revelation with Gambino in the tent, learning the truth, burns. Miura can fucking draw, and when you see the same teary-eyed expression on little Guts' face as the brief cry at the end of The Black Swordsman, the feeling of Guts' soul searing away at the edges is visceral. When Guts experiences that darker than dark point of the spectrum of interpersonal violence and sex, he has an inherent need to find a reason in it, crush it, resolve it, or do anything to get it away. But after all of that, there's a heartbreaking question that he has to ask himself. Why me? That question comes in waves. It's not a one-and-done issue ever. Sometimes the pain quiets down, but the reality is, the situation will never be rendered fair. The pain echoes throughout Guts' life, often at inopportune times. Following this traumatic experience, Guts goes on his first rampage, excising the pain inside out, transacting it onto the wolves that attack him, beings of an unfair world. He fucks them up. He subsists, and that's the most empathetic position for Guts to occupy in the wake of such an unfair start. Much later, in another mortally injured state, Guts hallucinates another encounter with Donovan. That memory is activated by Casca, straddling his side, keeping him warm. Inherently, this point in the story serves a strong purpose, a base apprehension in their romantic relationship that's going to be the conduit for a good deal of pain in the wake of the Golden Age. But in the meantime, we're in for a period where Guts can come to grow a bit. In the midst of that development, we can focus our attention on Casca, one of the baddest love interests to ever grace manga. Casca's a bit of a hard case upon her entrance. She's just as, if not more, stubborn than Guts, and devout to Griffith. We come to learn this dedication spawned from their initial meeting when Casca was a girl, where Griffith comes to save her from a pedophilic aristocrat. Griffith enables Casca to fight, sparking her growth into a ruthless female soldier. The story of young Casca is told in an intimate moment shared between the two in a cave, in the Eye of the Storm, where before Guts and Casca clash in an incongruent set of ideals, they come to understand each other through the constant fight boiling within each of them. Amidst the two of them is Griffith, and his own story of pain is told. He who provided Casca with the means to protect herself, so too willingly resigned himself to sexual pain for the means to his dream. It's not a healthy love between Casca and Griffith. Hers is one that isn't sustainable, bearing the grit of a ruthlessly ambitious man's ever-growing wants and urges. In the forest, Guts throws his own hat in the ring as well. Like Griffith taught her to fight, now Guts does too as well, being her inspiration to persist even though she's disadvantaged. Unlike Gantz, where a woman being assaulted is a chance for Kato to come in and be the savior, Berserk's development with Casca is a bit more empowering, allowing others to have faith in her as a competent warrior, enabling her to save herself. The fact she transitions towards loving Guts from this development doesn't feel unearned. It makes for a really perfect springboard into an affirmative, requited, albeit at times similarly hostile, ballad of love her and Guts are bound to face for the next several hundred chapters. Well, that's a bit of a lie. Before that, you have to face the elegy for Guts and Griffith's friendship, some iconic two-page spreads of their blades clashing, followed by Guts' exodus, which ultimately leaves his and Casca's love unrequited for the time being. Out of this, we instead follow a line of malign sexual tendencies, those being Griffith's. Throughout the narrative until this point, Griffith is painted in sort of a childlike wonder. His mannerisms are youthful and exuberant. He's a dreamer, Ultimately, while this is usually appropriated to paint his character in a rather auspicious light, that childlike wonder manifests itself as a bit of an immature petulance after Gantz leaves. This all provides pretty important texturing to make his most carnal evil tendencies and perhaps the most painful moment in Berserk all the more real. Unfortunately, it also enables the side of Berserk's handling of sex that I find incredibly grating. As mentioned earlier, Griffith once resigned himself to a creepy old man to further the Band of Hawk. To him, the most intimate acts in life are transactional. They are something that can be given and taken as convenient. In the heat of the moment, Griffith can come to make decisions, inundated with his pride. One such action being when he breaks into Princess Charlotte's room following Guts' departure. This could devolve into a meta conversation about homoeroticism between Guts and Griffith, followed by some cutesy little intercut footage of the water bucket scene from '97. But there's a more interesting dynamic at play. Griffith needs control, and in feeling it slip away, he opts to dominate elements of life that he can, i.e. Princess Charlotte. The moment builds out with his childish selfishness that rationalizes his later behaviors. But with that being said, it also gives cause for an angle of Berserk I will call
my world building.
I don't give a fuck who friend it is.
C-U-C-K-O-L-D. And that's kind of how Will Smith's looking right now.
Yeah, that's how he's looking to me like
Come on home, man.
whatever happened to fingering? Man, that shit used to be lit. You go by your nigga and tell your nigga.
That is not a lot compared to motherfucking R. Kelly.
Why the fuck would you do something like that?
Be a part of my family.
Come on now, dog. Come on, man.
That's who that you should have called pet control for your motherfucking aim.
Leave me alone. Hey, bro, come on now, dog. Come on, man. Hey, bro, come on now, dog.
Come on,
Look at this troll up here, bro. Look at him. Look. Why you gonna come on my page with that, bro? Fuck your troll game. This is not TikTok, homie. This ain't TikTok, blood. You love him, I love you too. Tired of these stupid trolls. Every time I wake up in the morning, there's trolls in my comments. I'll fuck your mama. I'll fuck your mama. Have her suck my dick and put my dick in her ass, you bitch.
Have your titties out, have your pussy lips out, have everything out.
Oh boy.
Despite my proclivity towards sarcastically dissociating from some of the world-building elements with humor, some of the abhorrent developments are structurally sound. Sometimes those developments force you to look at the world like the denizens of the world must too. And I'm not going to personally say that I find all of it excusable, but I can see the internal reason. There's an internal fate, threads of causality if you will, that run through a lot of Berserk. The world is quite unfair because the story is being puppeteered. I think a specific example that paints this force quite well is Dogface. Homeboy shows up when he does because he's a harbinger of the eclipse. He's an apostle. He's meant to be there, it's perfectly fated, and it makes sense because he's an appetizer for the main entree of pain. This fate is the perfect facade for the hiding, categorically deafening pain of the Golden Age. That true pain realigns Dogface in purpose. See, while his initial setup seemed to be vapid and edgy, with the context of what comes later, it's almost a tacky facade to the true wickedness in store. Berserk sets you up for a 1-2 punch. The first jab seems telegraphed and contrived, easily brushed aside as ridiculous, and potentially, dare I say it, exploitative? Then bang! You find an emotional resonance that can tangle with the power of Perfect Blue.
Problematic, exploitative, any way you want to try and pigeonhole it.
There are two sides to every coin. Simply ignoring Dogface because he's inconvenient isn't exactly honest or reflective of the world of Berserk. Much like he exists as a product of the world of Berserk, so too does the dynamic that makes the eclipse so heartbreaking perfectly rest upon this painful dichotomy, and I wouldn't change it for the world, even if I hate Dogface. When I say
my world building,
it's a deeper analysis than simply saying these vapid, gross, and gratuitous scenes are justified simply because they texture out the world. That would kind of be a point in favor of Gantz, although beyond it just being edgy and uncomfortable, it also is boring and bad. But I say,
my world building.
because without these elements, you quite literally would not have the same Berserk. It doesn't mean that I like it, or I think it's handled in the best way, or that a lot of it doesn't personally burn me deep under my skin. But at the end of the day, it doesn't feel any less like itself. Some parts aren't just gross, they're also really strange. But then, so is Miura. And I'll take an ounce of suspect content for the relative metric fuck ton of genius this man has poured into Berserk. That genius took a seed in his mind's eye, and grew it into a world unto itself. And that world was brilliant, and enrapturing. That world also built out an intense love, seen between Guts and Casca, and to be honest, there are moments where the two look uncannily similar. At first glance, it's pretty obvious to write this off as endemic of Miura's visual style. A lot of characters look derivative of one another, but thematically, and definitely not just conveniently, the pair's mutual encounters with potential childhood trauma and the way that they differ fits the visual really well. Casca was able to escape that traumatic experience, whereas Guts endured it. The two have their own respective apprehensions that work such that they grow together to reconcile their differences. It's for that reason that their most intimate moment, where they finally come together after Guts returns to the Band of Hawk, their discussion of scars is all the more impactful emotionally. Casca notes that Guts has learned to take on scars for other people, no longer just in an effort to continue to live for himself. Fundamentally, Casca is a visage of a child who escaped the trauma Guts endured, but she still regularly faces it in the world of Berserk. Out of his context, Guts letting her in and being vulnerable with her is the equivalent of dedicating his life to protecting her. The foundational vulnerability of the scene, rooted within the violence and scars of the world, brings it together with an intense weight and a full realization of their love. Within the darkness of the waning light of the Golden Age, as the Band of Hawk meanders down the long spiraling subterranean depths of the tower to find Griffith, there's a brilliant visual parallel. Guts finds himself reflected in Griffith's eye, much like Casca was when Guts had a flashback during their tryst. Here too, Griffith chokes him, Guts being the totem of Griffith's failure, much like Casca was the totem of Guts' trauma. This strikes a chord in the dualistic love and pain between the three main characters. It's actualized in Guts hugging Griffith in the wake of the action, understanding the burden he placed on his friend, and Griffith reaching back to comfort him as well. I'd argue panels like these are the foundation for the unrelenting pain of the eclipse. It's the unbreakable dichotomy of deep affirmative love with faded ruminating pain, and how the two twist and warp one another that makes the climax all the more lucid. Griffith gave actualization and Griffith taketh away. This is one of many scenes in Berserk that lives larger than life. The fact that Griffith was the one to initially empower Casca to save herself when she was a girl, only to take it away on a whim to spite Guts, is, well, it's demonic. It's also perfectly fitting, maybe too much so, but every ounce of it comes off as believable. The pain that incises deeper and deeper. Maybe it cements his nature as an unkind god. Perhaps it's more relevant to his lacking nature as a human. Two sides, same coin. Chapters before the eclipse, there's a brief hallucination segment where Griffith muses of a happy life as a middle-class wagecock, with Casca as his fail-wife, and the Band of Hawk as his children. While the scene is vague and sort of evokes an emotion that's more equivalent to an emotional valence, grasping at fleeting feelings, the most salient emotions strike me as a reflection of how fly-by-night Griffith is, seeding from his entitlement. He's allowed to dream of whatever the hell he wants. If he wants Casca, she's his because he's Griffith. That mentality is indicative of a god, a sort of self-fulfilling causality that is so childish and vain it almost feels preordained. His actions in the eclipse extend past resentment towards Guts or Casca. It's out of spite towards the world that didn't align with his unnecessarily large expectations. Guts and Casca are simply agents who are forces against him, and for maligning his expectations, Griffith executes one of the most vile things I've ever seen pen to paper. The scene is visceral, the emotions are an unclear mess of high-frequency negativity corroding the sheen of the Golden Age. It becomes a nightmare from there on out, while it had trended downward in tone ever since Guts left the Band of Hawk, and in the advent of Dogface it seemed downright gratuitous, hyperbolically so. A stark pain rings out in this scene, all the more true. This magical tale that seemed larger than life came crashing down, and it all hinged on fundamentally empathetic, raw, emotional, sexual violence. In my cringe hack lefty hippiedom, I want to cite Slavoj Zizek, a 2006 documentary on cinema and the unconscious mind. A crux thesis that Zizek proposes in this film is that items manifest themselves in a world outside of a character within cinema, and become a sort of extension of that living person. In cinema, which is an unclear and ambiguous reflection of life, these objects, these totems, live as personification of unconscious desires. I see no reason this can't extend to people as well. If in our heads people exist as our expectations of them, when people break our expectations, reconciling that becomes overwhelming. While the most immediate reflection of Zizek's theory on the unconscious mind may lie within the demons that perpetually haunt Guts following the eclipse,
The most raw example exists within his relationship with Casca. Following the eclipse, Casca ultimately exists to Guts as an extension of himself, in two ways. In one way, Casca exists as she always had in his past mind, a person who he loves desperately, one who until the eclipse had evaded a trauma he was burdened with. The other exists in the present context, as a visage of his past, an unconscious token of his trauma, a person whose fate is sealed. These two unconscious drives are divisive. They fundamentally clash, irreconcilable. And since Casca doesn't exist satisfying both, Guts can't cope. He initially abandons her, walking his own path once again, to avoid all the pain he can't reconcile. In his absence, he becomes darker than ever, showing the impossible nature of his situation. Avoidance doesn't solve the problem. He still loves Casca deeply, and upon his return, he realizes she's gone. This seems to be a landmark narrative moment, where Guts' character arc should pivot to quell the endless darkness with the light of love. This declaration in a normal story would be the beginning of the end, a neat bow where out of the darkness our character comes to be emotionally emancipated from his woes, vindicated from his misdeeds earlier. But this is Berserk. It's not spoon-feeding us a sugary resolution. When the two do finally reunite, Guts is immediately tempted back to his desire to return to the fray and obliterate Griffith. From here, we're led down a path where Guts' unquenched desire renders him a broken clock, returning to being spiteful towards Casca due to his unresolved pain. With this underlying vitriol, Guts breaks, causing him to return to his toxic unease, lashing out at Casca and sometimes boiling up to a full-on desire for her death. Many friends have said that this behavior makes Guts come off as an anti-hero at best and completely unlikable at worst. To me though, Guts is the perfect example of a tragic male figure who was never equipped to handle the tempest of emotions the world planned to throw his way. When men are taught to live by the sword, they often forget the hiding emotional violence cuts just as deep.
In that lack of mental preparedness, I have a story I'd like to share. When I was 15, I hadn't touched a single of the proverbial bases of sex, and then in one night, I had rounded them all. Now, the baseball metaphor satisfies a pretty classically toxic masculine archetype, and it doesn't really fit my story too well anyway, so let's be progressive. In this story, we got a lady on the plate, and I'm on third base, signaling she only needs a double, and homegirl, she hit a dinger, ignoring my signal. My consent, if you will. Look, the story's complicated. Baseball may not track and definitely isn't appropriate, and everyone's uncomfortable now. And that's probably all we need to say. This perfectly reflects how lost I was at that point in my life, where my entire being was ripped out of place. Still, when I was a young man, struggling to pin down how he should be feeling, there were absolute kings in my life who maintained deep vulnerability with me. So too do I find deep comfort in Guts' story. Narrative, be it real life or even beautifully inked art, holds inherent value to someone. A story told is better than none at all, because it breathes meaning into the pain under the surface. Living in the frequency of an ambiguous gray truth, of a sexual discomfort rendered upon me that couldn't be undone, I didn't know how to cope. For a long time, I bottled it up and moved forward. I didn't trust people easily, and more than anything, I didn't talk about it. When I finally did open up romantically again, it was a nightmare. I would find myself acting in ways that felt divorced of how I actually felt, every minute inside of my head, yelling at myself to get a fucking grip. This complete dissonance, almost feeling like a causal force that wasn't something I could overcome, beat me to a pulp. And I broke. For like a year of my life. As I learned to live with myself as a bad person, who must have deserved this fate, everything became a little bit easier. When people entered and tried to prove otherwise, they were fighting an uphill battle.
Guts may not be a sympathetic protagonist to a lot of people, and that's okay. The point of this section isn't whether or not Guts is sympathetic, because that boils down to personal opinion. What I'll say is that more than anything, Guts is simply human. He's a reflection of the reality that a lot of people experience. He's weak and falters to unconscious drives, to solve unsolvable problems. He might be a bit more universally relatable if he found a route to the high ground, but by being pathetic, he reflects the true vulnerability of people who experience deep trauma and aren't able to reconcile it. Man, this section's gotten really dark. Sorry the humor's taking a backseat for a second, folks. Why don't we wrap this section up with something peachy? Drakengard!
is a game rightly compared to Berserk in many respects. It's clear the psychotic, ultra-genius Yoko Taro took a lot of inspiration from the dour tone wrought by violence, and wanted to imbue similar consequential pain in his storytelling with Drakengard. That pain comes through in strides. The clearest parallel to Guts is Kaim, a ruthless soldier equipped to slaughter an endless horde, basking in the blood flow of an overwhelming battlefield.
Kaim, the soldiers are mere child conscripts. Please, show them mercy.
Mother, I don't want to die!
Kaim, please, no!
Someone help me! We've done the wrong! I'm afraid.
Peace now. It is all over.
I believe the reason Taro's games resonate so deeply with people, who rightfully idolize his style, is because he manages to establish an emotional atmosphere. For reasons like this, the echoes of Berserk I feel in Drakengard aren't exclusive to Kaim. They find themselves amongst many of the characters, and when it comes to his trauma, Mana is the first who comes to mind. Mana is a tough nut to crack for me. Upon initially watching a homie play Drakengard so I didn't have to, I found myself less than sympathetic towards her nearing ending A. Look, she's got a force of unadulterated Kino behind her. But ultimately, I couldn't wrap my head around the whole concept of the Watchers at that point, so I found it difficult to sympathize with a person who committed such atrocities, even if she was a child. She was a child. She was a child. For a while after Drakengard wrapped, I grappled with Mana's character, and slowly my opinion changed. Considering her experience of abuse, complacency in development, and overall lack of agency in the matter I judged her for, it no longer seemed fair. The cause of my initial rejection became clear. Mana's state was a manic high that I found uncomfortably well realized, aligning with feelings I had buried deeply. Misdeeds exacted without agency, followed by intense self-hatred and an overwhelming rejection of reality. It seared, and it was an uncomfortable moment that I immediately rejected as it hit too close to home for me to accept. Guts is a similar case, and regardless of personal experience, it's fair that detestable behavior that's uncomfortably reminiscent of personal shortcomings puts people off in a character. Still, there's a profound power within narrative discomfort when it's well realized and cuts deep. It gives way to the rawest storytelling you'll find, even if at first it seems impossible to contend with. Take time and contemplate the narrative chords that resonate harshly. You'll often find some magic in there. When I say Guts is a survivor, and that makes his story incredibly important, that comes out of a personal context for a character who ultimately liberated me in tough times, and gave me a reflection of a man who could overcome insurmountable waves of emotional turmoil. That's desperately important to me. But the reason I shared my personal context last is because it's irrelevant to the relative power of each of these narratives.
Gantz isn't just bad because it saddles itself with edgy content that makes me uncomfortable. It's awful because that edgy content substantiates no internal meaning and provides no value in its context. At its best, it's vapid and empty, and at its worst, it's downright despicable. Within Chainsaw Man, the messages of masculine vulnerability, rudimentary as they may be at times, are raw, and Fujimoto composed an incredibly empowering shonen. Ugly as the honesty of Berserk may be, its presentation of a man picking up the pieces of himself, twice, over decades of real-world time, is both empowering and profound, and is yet another reason it's the greatest manga of all time.
Different when Mike left, and it was Scotty team. X won't take me back without me, the bitch when they got a ring. The revolution is the genocide. Tell the hoe she don't know Nan. Trick daddy slip and slide, nigga.
305 in my yo. Subject to let a bitch know the line on the dashboard of my 75. Come on.
Amidst the eye of our storm, I'd like to take a chance and give credit where something has been handled unilaterally correctly. There's a point where all three of these tales manage to actually realize their world fully. Out of a violent framework, the side characters of each of these narratives manage to paint the texture of a tragedy quite well. Yeah, I have to grit my teeth considering Oku's inclusion of the vampires. Kei's little brother Akira provides me about as much narrative depth as beer bong and paint thinner provides nutrition. Regardless, looking at the cast of Hen, I'd like to commend Oku's growth. He reined in his vast potential for derangement and struck gold against the side characters where it matters. For the sake of depth over breadth, I'm going to focus on 2 characters for each story here, and since we've been mean to Gantz for a bit, why don't we start there? We meet Sakurai amidst him attempting to strangle himself with a belt tied to a doorknob. Yeah, much like the rest of Gantz, Oku defaults to bull in a china shop writing here, but this is one of the places it works. Through some brilliant quick visual storytelling, we're aware he's not welcome at school. He's on some death cult message board, where people are cheering him on to end it. And in the end, he can't do it. When it comes to the world of Gantz, Sakurai is a prime target, someone who's been consumed by the negativity of it all, and just wants an out. And in that negativity, Sakata finds him.
In the very same chapter, we're introduced to psychic powers in Gantz. This could have very well been another failed concept Oku threw at the wall, but this one stuck, because Oku assigned the psychic power motif to characters who were competently written. Comparatively to the unsympathetic waste of space vampires, Sakurai is really well placed in the overall story. He enters at the same point where Kei seems to be lost in the world, at an overwhelming low. Here we're met with a foil to him, Sakurai, someone who has even less to live for. Through Sakata's psychic power, Sakurai is tested, in a beyond brilliantly illustrated panel, with the audio theme of his thumping heart swelling across the entire page. As the anxiety of the scene ramps, and we see his beating heart pressured by this godly power, Sakurai says that he doesn't want to die. Liminality is a super important concept for story structure. I'll be relying on it a lot for this essay, so let's nail down some meaning. Merriam-Webster defines it as relating to or being in an immediate state, phase, or condition. Many cultures have rites of passage, where in order to become an adult, an individual is torn down entirely and must find a way to build themselves back up. While the dictionary definition tends to emphasize the intermediate state, I tend to also consider the cause and effect of liminality equally important. The deconstruction, followed by growth. Initially, Gantz sets Sakurai up as though he had already reached his liminal phase. His ideation, coupled with a failed attempt to end his life, certainly suggests a relative emptiness within him. Sakata's entrance of the new psychic power seems to be Sakurai's light out of that darkness, to guide him up to his new self. Here we're met with a nice little training montage of stupid trivial little psychic powers. He blows up an eraser and he feels like he's got the juice. Then we recontextualize his new goal in life. He's gonna go murder his bullies. There's a brief moment of foreshadowing where on the message board, a person named Tonkatsu messages him begging him not to do it, saying that it will be the worst thing he's ever done. However, Sakurai, who seemingly is about to arise out of the ashes of his liminal state, a bright new phoenix, continues to school, where we're met with more of Oku's weird bathroom nonsense. Before they can do anything, Sakurai snaps and murders all 5 of the bullies in a brutal display. This is depicted via some of the best work Gantz's CGI modeling produces, where the veins of a beating heart pulse and rip apart. Through additional visuals, it's more clear that this is being seen in the point of view of Sakurai. This man is witnessing the violence of his actions in the same detail as us, and the horror of the situation reveals the brilliance in Sakurai's writing. When we first meet him, Oku does a good job convincing us that Sakurai is well in the midst of his liminal period, almost as if we had met him at the bottom half of his story, ready to rise up and be born anew. This facade bottoms out with the true horror of violence, and we come to realize he hadn't hit true nothingness. The true liminality is found in murder, and the havoc it wreaks upon your soul. The girl from the message board named Tonkatsu ultimately emails him once again, and she is the path to his world born anew. Still, before that change occurs, when we initially meet her in Shinjuku, Sakurai laments that being a murderer merits a sacrifice, throwing himself into the hail of Izumi's bullets. Paralleling a universal concept of liminality, Oku plays with expectation, which ultimately furthers his most realized theme. When things seem their darkest, they can always get darker. With that being said, it ain't always going to be dark. Within the ensemble, Gantz also manages to flesh out one of its story's central themes. See, one of the most interesting facets of the story of Gantz is how humans fight the overbearing darkness that surrounds our very existence. Only a chapter after Sakurai's arc, we're introduced to probably one of the best side characters of Gantz. Unfortunately, Eyepatch Wolf, the Mac-Irish Velian scumbag he is, already did Muscle Rider.
And he did him a whole lot of justice. So let's talk about a different character who paints a whole lot of light in the darkness. Let's talk about the old man.
We meet the old man in the wake of the Shinjuku massacre, one of the lowest points in Gantz, and in that darkness, he becomes fundamental in helping Kei become a bearable character. Throughout the arcs since the temple, Kei has dabbled with the idea of becoming more like Kato, becoming the hero, and the old man provides a light to guide his way. He's a relatively simple character. He provides an emotional reflection of Kei, with the mention of how important it is to hold those close to you dearly. At even the point where he's his least hopeful, Kei risks his life to save the old man, and supports him after lying to him to convince him that the suit is powerful, in hopes that the old man will maintain optimism and survive. And then, something magical happens. From Kei's small words, the old man believes, and he protects Kei and hurls the dinosaur in a mighty feat. From Kei's small actions, the old man gains his strength, and you get a hopeful light in the middle of the darkness. The old man embodies that spark of hope that spontaneously combusts out of hopelessness, which is one of the profound ideas that Gantz evokes time to time throughout its narrative. When the pair stumble across a family who fell into the world of Gantz, one of whom, the father, is bleeding out, and Kei just wants to run away, the old man reminds him that he can become the hero they need. Together they can win. And then they do, and in a series of some of the coolest action panels in the series, awesome motorcycle gunplay meets fireball-spitting T-Rexes. As the old man whips the bike serpentine to avoid the various fireballs flying around, Kei realizes what he has to do. The old man's guidance to never let go of the one you love rings true. Kei splits a fireball in half with a Gantz gun, flies off the back of the bike, and in the darkest moment, as the last T-Rex hovers over him, the old man's words that K will persist reverberate throughout his mind, reminding him of the hero he can become. It's a great moment where this despicable main character earns his cockiness and recontextualizes it for a balanced confidence, and it's all via the strength of some random old man. I know I've been writing this section like it should have ended with either of the last couple paragraphs, but Oku's nothing if not self-indulgent, and there's one final moment of action that occurs within this arc that seals the old man as fundamental in reflecting K's change. Upon besting the final dinosaur, we're met with a truly terrifyingly huge final dinosaur that K acts as a decoy to draw away. The old man, ever protective of K, convinces Izumi to help him fight it, and in the last moment where it seems like the alien will crush K, Izumi jumps in to parry the dinosaur's tail with his sword. It's only in this moment that K has the final surge of strength to destroy the creature's heart with the Gantz gun, and stands under it in a truly badass stance, gun cocked high ready to blow this fucker away. This is of course not the case, because Gantz is dumb and this is another false peak. Look, I know we're being positive here, but I need to break down this issue of false peaks, because this isn't the last time we'll see them in Gantz. See, Oku has a tendency to write his story such that it falls into a structure much like a 6-year-old would write one.
And then but then, and then but then, and then but then, and then but then, and then but then.
I know there might be some people angrily raising their hands at me from the front of class as I, the underpaid public school lit teacher, humbly attempt to ignore you, only to have you passive-aggressively twitch your arm, as though you've just gone into anaphylactic shock and the proverbial EpiPen is me calling on you, so that you can crack a smug smile and say,
Actually, I think false peaks are pretty good methods of subversion of typical storytelling conventions, Professor Douglas.
And I, with my shitty faux tweed suit I recently purchased from Kohl's that I recently also spilled sweet and sour sauce on, would suppress a glare through the midst of my melancholic pangs of benzodiazepine withdrawal and explain to you, yes, Emma, why are they always named Emma? You are correct. I have no reason to correct you. I went to college for a meaningless degree, and am now using it to explain a hypothetical situation where I'm a teacher ignoring a student. The important reality of a false peak isn't that on its own it's not an exciting enough premise. After all, once in a while a subversion of expectations based upon all the stories we've been conditioned to expect can be incredibly compelling. Here's a fitting example to compare against Gantz. The 2002 classic Azumanga Daioh is one of the funniest things human beings will ever create. In it, our endearing cast spend their time being very wholesome, which is coupled really well with blunt humor. A great example occurs in this gag, where Sakaki is discussing her height, and in one of her many moments of brilliance, Osaka deduces that height is a transactional unit, and thus, Sakaki must have stolen Chiyo's height. This is relayed by the simple question posed by Chiyo to Sakaki. You took my height, didn't you? This is the peak of the joke, and it's very cute and charming. And then, she says it again, and it's hilarious. And then, she says it again, and it's even funnier. 3 times the charm, what a good bit. And then, get this, she says it again. 3 more times, and each time is excessively funnier, because each time she says it, her voice seemingly peaks as a little bit more accusatory. This is the greatest bit ever. And then it gets even better. You get this adorable little gag of Chiyo jumping at Sakaki, repeatedly demanding that she give back her height, and it's just so cute and funny. This true peak, after 6 false ones preceding it, works well. It's fine to have multiple false peaks, even in a single arc. A joke is a story. It builds on itself and increases tension. The true problem is that stories are also akin to jokes. When you tell the same one too often, it often becomes incredibly tired and unfunny. The problem within false peaks isn't so much that they exist within Gantz, or that they even occur multiple times within an arc. It's more so that most of the arcs in Gantz rely on false peaks in their structure. So instead of subversion, it becomes the expected convention, and that becomes very boring. In this way, I'm always ready for things to become worse. And while one could argue that that aids the negative outlook of the story, to me it just removes any element of surprise, and it also makes many of the missions drag. As I said before, Oku's not only fond of using them for each arc, he also tends to include more than one false peak in an arc, and within the Dinosaur Park arc, God what a difficult remark. This is not the final moment. As from below we witness as the creature opens eyes all over its stomach. Once again, K seems like he might not have hope, and then a hero comes to his rescue. The old man holds the dinosaur's tail down, and together they blow him away. Despite false peaks being a prevailingly negative development in Gantz's framework, this one at least gets to a climax with a sweet little moment that cements the old man's character. The old man exists as an extension of K. It's not just that his character helps K grow, it's a mutual respect in that the old man also wants to be like K. There's something quite magical about their mutual bond that seemingly comes out of existence from nowhere. In this way, their relationship becomes a force to challenge the negativity of the world of Gantz. Through relatively simple technique, Oku's able to paint an alternative narrative and introduce a prevailing light opposite the darkness, and I do want to give him credit for that.
Likewise, his ability to distill complete darkness into Sakurai's character serves as a conduit to strengthen the framework of that darkness within the story at large. Sculpted out of the same violence, they come to reflect out upon the world and make Gantz the gripping experience that it's prided to be. And I know I've been harping on it, but at its best, it is legitimately addicting. Within the world of Chainsaw Man, we meet the beloved cast of characters that are so goated that there's no obvious pick for worst girl. If you find yourself questioning, what about Makima?
You are a coward!
Regardless of your bad takes on the most alluring female in the world of narrative at large, the extended cast of Chainsaw Man are brilliant because they continue to flesh out the world around them, such that they can effectively reflect off of Denji. In GTO, when the vice principal continually has his car smashed, it's a funny gag to Nene on the wagecock whose car is his only potential for happiness. A cute social commentary. When Kobeni's car gets totaled, it's hilarious, and that's under the pretense that she has to use it to help her impoverished family, who forced her to either become a public sector ragdoll or a literal prostitute. Both stories are pretty excellent critiques of capitalism, but one of them has the benefit of being about cute girl who make funny reaction image. It's tough to pick just two of the lovable cast. But the two most magnetic side characters for me are Aki and Himeno. In such a condensed, fast-paced narrative, their stories are interlinked so much that even in Himeno's passing, her energy remains in the story overall, through Aki, disseminated through him to the world at large. Upon meeting Aki, we found our prime candidate for an older brother to Denji. Dark eyes and hair with a chip on his shoulder, his character is a pure exemplar of rumination. It's pretty clear his MO stems from a great source of loss. One we'll come to find out was at the hands of the Gun Devil. But the way that he manifests his personality is in an abrasive and hostile manner. Comparatively, Himeno's entrance is bright and bubbly. This is undercut by the haunting simple picture of her grimly injured in a field of graves, where we learn she's been rendered partnerless 6 times. While she tends to obscure this reality with her flirtatious and jovial attitude, the darker side of Himeno also manifests itself from time to time, which can be seen when she chokes out power in a blunt manner. Her character has an interesting dichotomy. In a way, her and Aki are good foils for one another, in the way they manage their trauma. Where Aki attempts to push those in his life away, hiding the deep emotional vulnerability under it all, Himeno holds those dear to her close, with the deep warped decay of her smashed life burning under the surface. A common behavior tying the two together is cigarettes, a fittingly deadly habit for two people who already have one foot in the grave. Amidst their parallel fate, cigarettes make for an interesting crossroads, where they can almost find actualization in burning their life out of their own volition. All in all, you can see how violence has effectively soldered itself into the framework of their development, and how it's bonded them tightly. Don't die, Aki. In line with typical older, flawed, flirtatious female archetypes of Japanese media, Himeno also gravitates towards alcohol. Out of that cliche where you just expect to hear a Chainsaw Man goes a step forward, cutting through the sexual tension like a butter knife. That butter knife being Himeno's tongue slicing down Denji's throat, and after that polite entrance, her vomit. Now, I'm a master virtue signaler. When I see an unfair depiction of a woman who is not entirely perfect, I screech.
Evil men! How dare you take women off of a pedestal? They are goddesses who cannot have flaws!
But being a sub-100 IQ shell of a human who signals virtues due to having none of his own, when a writer throws in kino comedy that's so utterly funny, I immediately forget the fact that they dared make a woman look flawed, and holler like an ape. This was a great gag to tie up this little arc. Good spot of humor there to resolve the tensions of the hotel. And now on to the next devil. Wait, what? Where's Denji? What the hell? She's baby birding and booze? How the hell did this Eren jump? At this point, Himeno's personality as a character has been super well realized in a short period of time. At the relative beginning of our little shonen tale, she's primed to be a mentor for the group, with her own relative faults and insecurities, all tempered by a relatively escapist mindset. Looking at the world around her, it's hard to fault that, and out of that you get a conflicted yet sympathetic character, who's a great foil to Aki, who at this point in the story is understandably hostile, still isn't much fun to be around. The two seem like their dynamic has ample time to be explored, and then homegirl gets capped. What? In almost breakneck pace, the tides of the story shift. There's a unilateral gunfire rained down upon the Devil Hunters, hitting Denji and Himeno in the process. Before you have a chance to breathe, the action swells, and the story set course for a pretty gnarly tragedy. Himeno, bleeding out, sacrifices herself to save Aki, maintaining her deepest sentiment to him since they met. Aki isn't allowed to die, and ultimately, in these decisions, we have the more comforting character of the two removed, and we're left with the broken hostile wreck of a character who really needs to tell his Supercuts barber to chill. Himeno's exit is wonderfully handled. After having just enough time to intrigue us, the world snuffs her out. A moment like this really just demands itself to be compared as superior to Gantz, with any number of female counterparts decay.
Considering vapid sexual relationships, comparatively to the death of Kei's first girlfriend, I actually feel a lot of pain in Himeno's loss, where I was interested to see where her character would grow. I found no such common interest in whatever cute biker GF would have developed into, because there was nothing there. It feels personally unfair to me, because Himeno had been one of my favorite characters in the story to that point, and one I was looking forward to seeing more of. But that unfairness feels nothing less than fitting of the story. In the wake of Himeno's death, one of the most heartbreaking moments is seeing Aki pick up the pack of cigarettes, and fittingly question how much of his life he's still doomed to live. Time for another aside. There is a... I'm not doing that, that's not cool. There's this shot in Black Lagoon where Revy and Rock are sitting in the back of a squad car after fighting for an entire episode. The two are fundamentally at odds with one another, hinging on the fact that Revy's yet to fully trust Rock. After a dramatic flare and a complete breakdown, the two sit quietly in the back of this cop car.
And Revy asks Rock to light her cigarette, mouth to mouth.
From there we get a wicked, romantic, and empathetic moment of visual storytelling. As the music swells, you can tell they've come to a mutual understanding through the shared cigarettes. The cigarettes aren't simply a set of cancer sticks. They're a representation of interpersonal resolution. The pair's lives aren't happy. They're not fully resolved in their interpersonal problems forever. But amidst the eye of the storm, they sit and have a brief reprieve from the overwhelming life around them. They burn out cigarettes in a somber understanding paralleling the lives they too burn out. There's a deep collective unconscious power underneath sharing a cigarette with someone that feels incredibly personal. So when I see Aki sitting and crying with the cigarettes, unable to fight with Himeno for throwing her life away for him, and therefore also unable to share a cigarette with her afterwards to make up, I feel the loss of the deep emotional resolution that Black Lagoon scene instilled. I said before it felt unfair to me that I wouldn't be able to continue to be entertained by Himeno's hijinks, but what becomes brutally clear in this scene is how much more unfair it is to Aki. It's something palpably incomplete, and it seemingly is never going to render itself whole once again. From here, Aki goes on a warpath, becoming more jaded in Himeno's exit. This warpath leads him to a final confrontation with the Snake Devil. But now with his new ability of Future Sight, Aki is able to beat down the Snake Devil. That is, after one last cigarette. That aforementioned cigarette Aki was never able to smoke with Himeno is finally granted. Poetically enough, being his first, she promised she'd hold on to. It's the last burst of influence Himeno's character births into the world, giving Aki the confidence to walk on without hesitation. Hey, remember that Gurren Lagann rant? Yet another dub for Chainsaw Man. Aki treads through a tragically beautiful field of flowers, akin to the field of graves he met Himeno in, emphasizing the haunting beauty of this moment, knowing that one day they'll meet again. This arc grasped at a profound pain, and since it's Chainsaw Man, it needed to have a light ending to wrap it up. Seeing Denji and Aki playfully kick the ever-living shit out of the Knife Devil was an adorable reprieve. It did a great job repeating the emotions found in the juvenile gum stunt Aki played to get a laugh out of Himeno previously, reflecting the transition to a newly budding relationship. In the wake of the Darkness Devil's arc, Aki starts to soften, initially opting to wave out of the fight with the Gun Devil, abandoning his hapless revenge fantasies to defend power in Denji. Much as Himeno was protective over him, so too has Aki co-opted that compassion towards his surrogate siblings. At this point in transformation closer to Himeno, tragedy is looming. Ultimately, the bell tolls for him when he decides to yield to Makima's desires, so that she will defend his siblings. And with that, Aki is doomed to become what he hates most, the Gun Devil. While inarguably painful for Denji, the heartbreaking aspect is the utter peace Aki finds in this decision, reflected in the snowball fight within his mind's eye. Aki found his fulfillment in finding a new sibling from the one he lost, one to care for, one to live for even. In a profound turn of events, Aki found peace in the violence he so desperately desired to crush, and Denji is able to complete his dream for him. It's perfectly fitting of the tragic world of Chainsaw Man, actualization of one's goals in the worst possible way, with violence tempering itself ironically into peace and reprieve. It's an exit that befits Aki, sacrificing himself for the one he loves, and wishes to protect like Himeno before him, and finding solace in the completion of his character. The sidecast of characters in Chainsaw Man do a great job of resonating the general tragic harmonics of the world at large. Himeno and Aki fit this mold, reflecting a transactional nature of trauma. Sadness sows sadness, as violence sows violence. It permeates, and in healthy relationships, a mutual understanding can be formed to help reconcile those issues. But under that all, the collective sharing of trauma and scars we leave on each other remain. In Himeno's death, she found peace and absolution. And unto Aki, she passed the baton of trauma. In Aki's death, he found peace and absolution, and unto Denji, he passed the baton of trauma. What did Denji do with that baton? More on that in Chapter 5. Look, there's a ton of side characters I could analyze in Berserk. See, Berserk's a special case. Mira's a champ at writing characters through and through. Doesn't hurt that their designs are so memorable. You wily artist, you. Well, in the spirit of the challenge, facing such great artistic display, allow me to put forth one of Berserk's greatest achievements in character development.
Even the Sims are cool.
When we first meet Judo, he initially exists as a foil to Guts' distrust, in that he's graciously welcoming. While Judo's not exactly textured at this point,
the fact that he pushes through Guts' antagonism is salient.
You can tell he's committed to holding the band of Hawk together. He's the glue. He's also a bit of a Shakespearean fool, as he's aware of the plan, and his lackadaisical attitude juxtaposes against the way he can always read situations clearly, such as when he guesses that Guts will push his way into the fight with Zod himself. In early situations, this presents itself with panels even as simple as him just sitting and observing situations in the background. Even in the midst of battle, these little moments shine through, with Judo highlighting his perceptive attitude. In the woods, in the first display of simp activity, Judo comes swooping in as a white knight for Casca. The reason Berserk does simps better though, is that this is the rawest simp behavior I've ever fucking seen. Sure, I can easily see the milady energy in the expression,
"She is our only flower."
But Judo looks perfectly calm and methodical in his rending of pain back upon his enemies. When Guts is horribly injured after the fight, the Shakespearean fool has fairy dust on hand, and enables Casca to revive Guts. In this action, he's pretty vehemently pushing their development along, furthering the bond so that they can both find affirmation in one another. It's a sweet bit of absolution for Judo's character, because what he finds precious over everything is the Hawk. That includes the people in it, and he puts others above himself. Judo is the embodiment of Dude's Rock. Homie continues to be the glue that holds the band together in the wake of Guts' exodus, albeit he's more of a support peg to the true glue of Casca. Judo's trying his best to hold her together as she holds the group together. Moreover, in Guts' return, he flashes the trademark Dude's Rock energy, simply signaling a thumbs up to the big guy, as if he saw it coming a mile away. Even when everything in the Hawk is dire, Judo continues to roll with it. In the wake of rescuing Griffith, there's a cute little moment where Judo feigns ignorance over his condition.
At this point, we're also aware that he's a calculated fool, that even Casca cuts through the facade,
dicing through Judo's pleasantries, asking for the true prognosis. Here, he lifts the veil, admitting that he noted Griffith's permanently out of commission. It's a brief moment, but at that very second, I find the emotions and raw darkness of the story tie a similar shadow to Judo's, which is inching closer to its conclusion. And with that, we reach the moment I've always wondered about Judo. Did he feel the end coming? When the band of Hawk is dissolving, Judo tells Guts off, demanding that he also make leave with the Hawk and forge his own path like he did once before. He also demands Guts take Casca with him. When he says he'll take care of Griffith, the panel is dark and ominous. The lackadaisical and cheery jokey Judo is all but gone. There's a panel or two where he submerges himself in the whimsy of the fitting life he could have lived as a thief. But for the most part, it's foreboding and stern, uncharacteristic of him. Yeah, the band of Hawk is falling apart, but times have been tough, time aplenty, and Judo's always been a well of inspiration. In a great bit of characterization, Miura uses every last piece at his disposal to subtly signal a turning wave, an intrepid force beneath the surface of the story, that only the most perceptive eye of Judo can perceive. And with it, there he goes as well. Judo kicks the bucket, in a moment that has the pinnacle ambiguity of symptom. Did he love Casca like that?
Who knows and who cares? He rules all the same.
Is it selfish that he wanted to be with Casca when he died, just knowing in that moment she might react to his death? Yeah, and we'll get to that. Regardless, Judo lived truly, and was a simple yet fully realized character that fit the perfectly sharp edge of the Golden Age.
So too was he taken out in a blunt manner, another victim, whose weight was felt in full, in the violent quake of Berserk. And that quake shakes us right on forward.
Serpico enters the story with the introduction to the Knights of the Holy Iron Chain. At first glance, there's something rather obvious. Hey look, this is just Judo again. He's a jovial, quick-witted, nonchalant blondie with a penchant for snarky jabs. Further down the line, as the Iron Chain's movement into the village gets tore through, Serpico reveals a bit more of the parallel between him and Judo, in his perceptive nature. He's the one to remark that all the blows dealt to the corpses were rendered by the same weapon. These being the first several establishing scenes for Serpico is cogent. As we'll come to see, he'll be the one to join Guts' entourage, and fill the hole that Judo left. That's not to say he's a carbon copy, far from it. There's a bit more of a sardonic Weasley undertone to Serpico. Judo might have had the perceptive eye of the Shakespearean fool down, but Serpico embodies the fool far deeper. The guy spits ignorant quips that are bound to land him in trouble, but he maintains that silly nature nonetheless. This through line between Judo and Serpico maintains itself even to the point where he cracks jokes with Guts following Firenze's little torture sesh, all while looking at her quietly. Once again, we got a simp on our hands. Even though I'm not too fond of the tower as an arc, and I see it as the weakest point in conviction, Serpico is still one of my favorite characters in Berserk. This is because he's not defined by the zealous energy around him. This makes him a good straight man in the heavy-handed horde of psychotic evangelists. Religion also finds an interesting dynamic with Guts, as he's been damned to live with the demons of the God Hand constantly chasing him. His disenchantment is understandable, and his resolute rejection of the nonsense, down to his wicked desire to disprove God's existence, is raw as hell. Farnese has an interesting loss of faith throughout this arc as well, albeit Guts is the cause. Religion itself isn't so much the cause as the deeper running emotional through line. Otherwise, the Casca retrieval arc seems to drag on to no end for me. But I guess the side characters she meets are charming and bubbly. The inclusion of religious persecution, while realistic to the barbaric tendencies of the Crusade, doesn't really do much for me, but it's salient. The power that does exist within this arc, maintaining as an enjoyable and overall quality experience, is derived from the emotional secondary developments, with truly raw moments like Guts saying, "If you ever meet God, tell him to get the fuck off my lawn." Developments like that are cool as tertiary B-plots. One of those is also Serpico's. In the cultist's cave, Serpico notices Farnese's anxiety as Guts escapes, and in complete stealth, he manages to maneuver himself to cut Guts off at the exit. Here, Serpico plays his typical nonchalant facade, only to expose his dire finesse after Guts tries to hit him with a plethora of bombs. Hanging onto a rock face with this blade in reach of a vital spot, beyond badass, Serpico grips onto an advantageous position, and one hell of an audible. This devolves into Serpico showing the depth of his wit, noting that Guts is out of his element on a slim cliff face, showing that as badass as Guts was cutting through every horde prior, that is his only forte. And now, for Farnese, he'll eliminate Guts. Perhaps it's simply to alleviate her anxiety around Guts. Perhaps it's to cut someone down he sees as a threat romantically. Regardless, this scene rings out as a true pinnacle of Serpico's abilities, and distinguishes him as a cutthroat agent, not just quick-witted, but also capable of swordsmanship. By the Millennium Falcon arc's beginning, it's weird to realize Serpico, who initially seemed like a retelling of Judo's story, will likely outlast his progenitor, and only now do we get the meat of his story. We cast our eyes upon a small, angry boy, living in poverty that led to absolute apathy.
This child is bullied, yet still fights the same losing battle with a plotting look in his eye.
As he'll have fighting a losing battle against gods, much later. Out of this, Farnese is his salvation, demanding Serpico as hers, paralleling the initial remark spurring this flashback. Serpico's mother, who now lives in constant delirium, always obsessed that he was the child of noble blood. In a moment of coincidence, this turns out to be the case, and Farnese is his half-sister. So all that simping up till now was done under the pretense of diet incest, which is kind of edible pastiche, and in less douchey terms. See, I've been known to be pretty vocal in my distaste towards siblings banging. It's my biggest problem with Monogatari, and in anime in general it puts me off. But here, the ambiguity has been recontextualized. He's never made romantic moves on his half-sister, despite having some desire. Plus, you know, it's medieval, it's a wee bit more justified. So all in all, their entire dynamic bases out into loneliness and intimacy. Judo's archetype has been subverted. We were beguiled by Berserk's penchant for intertextual reference, only to find something far more interesting. And now that character is practically completely disparate from his prototype aside from the perceptive nature and wit. Who knows where this will go? Oh, it's going to be sexual. So much for it not being sexual. From their base intimacy, Serpico decides to comfort her with her weird BDSM fixations. But it's not straight up sex, so... Yes, good. Good job, Serpico. Way to maintain your Sigma status, baby. In the finale of this flashback, Serpico is forced to burn his mother at the stake, as a heretic. In that action, he left behind any traces of poverty he once knew, so far gone that his mother only recognizes him as a noble now. He abandons everything that might have been only his, and becomes one with Farnese. Eventually their path becomes one with Guts, and Farnese's desire to follow him pulls Serpico in tow. He accepts this due to their established master-servant bond, although as he notes, if the bond should ever be broken, he'll waste Guts as soon as possible, menacingly staring him down with the same calculated open eyes. Homie's vigilant in his dedication, but below the surface of that vigilance, there's a hurricane of untamed emotions. Hey, speaking of hurricanes, Serpico gets a cool-ass wind cloak and dagger, on brand with his finesse. His first real battle experience with it shows a bit more of his trademark goofiness as well. Thing is, for a good deal of the story, Serpico's gone with the wind. Now his development's on hiatus, and it's a nice moment for him to shine in a lull, allowing Farnese to begin her own change. Within that, Serpico can reflect, see her devotion to magic, see her devotion to Casca, and capture a moment of unadulterated Kino. To a degree, this reads like the end of Serpico's journey, an absolution of sorts from Farnese, vindicating himself from the dissonance of a truly warped desire, purifying his innate goal to protect her. For the first time, the chains of symptom are broken, and that motif of the wind, that at face value seemed to be just cutesy characterization, well, it just found its nuance in the storm Serpico surrendered himself to. Man is gone, with the wind.
He resigns himself to a stormy battle, seemingly fully prepared to sacrifice himself for the gang. But he doesn't die.
Rather than an all-out sacrifice, Serpico's choice here serves to loosen the master-servant bond. From here on out, him and Farnese begin to saunter out of sync with one another in the narrative, more so due to her wanting to become a sorceress and Serpico losing his marbles in response.
But he clearly still wants to protect Farnese.
It's still at the forefront of his goals. In his eyes, opposite that goal, stands Guts. Upon entering the Vatican City in search of a boat, it dawns on Farnese that the best route would be nabbing one from her father, and with Serpico in tow, she returns home. In an almost conditioned state, Serpico returns to the quiet, closed-eyed yet always watching force we once knew him to be, simply idling in the background to support. It speaks to the power of the setting,
and a realistic reset for the pair, rendering them both back to their subservient days as children under a domineering force of the noble household. So too does Serpico humbly return their magic weapons, as the two resign themselves to the household in order to secure the boat for the rest of the gang. The price? Well, even if he cut that storm off as best as he could a while ago, this ain't gonna be ideal for our main boy Serpico. Farnese is getting hitched. She's not happy to end her journey, and as much as it might put her out of harm's way in Serpico's eyes, it's pretty clear this ain't gonna be a very fulfilling path for either of them. And her happiness is his happiness. Yada yada, wonder where this'll go. Farnese's mom guesses that her husband's bastard is down bad for her daughter, and is into it. That's what you guessed was gonna happen in this moment, right? Well, doesn't matter, it does happen. Thanks, Mira. Clearly though, in this moment, the mom's pulled the card on Serpico, almost guessing the fate of what's to come. Serpico, either stuck in his ways or verifying his strength, challenges Gantz one last time. It's a final tie to their story, a conflict of trust. Serpico's motivations all stem back to defending Farnese, in a truly badass fight sequence displaying all of Serpico's technical prowess. He and Gantz duke it out in a room full of pillars, all tumbling down. Serpico's emotions come out on full display here, noting Gantz' passive influence on him and Farnese, and his inability to cope with that change. Perhaps his fears are genuine, and he truly believes Gantz is a threat. Perhaps that threat is just that someone else might be better equipped to protect the woman he loves, in whatever way he loves her. Regardless of the cause, it doesn't matter. Serpico wants to snuff Gantz out because he's an inconsistent factor, not something that fits into his calculated plans. His unpredictability isn't something that jives with Serpico's stubborn nature, and despite the wind he had begun blowing with in their new journey, he no longer conforms to any will but his own. There's an inherent selfishness in that, one that's been there all along. Serpico protects Farnese for him. He threw himself into the suicide mission during the Calpe fight for him. He snarkily retorted and remained aloof for him. Serpico is based, and that's because like the rest of Berserk, he's a cripplingly human character, with his own shortcomings of selfishness, that boil over no matter how cold and calculated he demands himself to be. In Judo's final moments, he admits that protecting Casca in the end is for him. In Serpico's story, he reveals all the decisions to protect Farnese are for him. Both of these things reveal innate flaws in the empathetic capacity in relationships, especially for men. In the ending of Gurren Lagann, I'm so sorry. In the ending of Gurren Lagann, we bear witness to another great death aside from Kamina and Nia's, Katan's, where he sacrifices himself, diving into the anti-spiral singularity to kamikaze his way to glory. In his last moments, he maniacs on Yoko, and follows it up with a quick retort about how he's being selfish per usual. It's Kino self-awareness, but like the rest of TTGL, the power isn't gained primarily from originality. This cliched behavior of men deciding they need to go out in a blaze of glory is like, genetic. End of the day, all three sacrifices in question are done with the desired outcome of protecting more people, no doubt. At the bottom of it all though, there's more pernicious selfish drives. I've thrown the term simp around a lot in this chapter, mainly because it's a cutesy catch-all that neatly confines these two characters via their unrequited love. Simps become a bit of a nonsense word, meant to discourage individuals from exposing how truly down bad they are. At first glance, it's not worth much more than a quick laugh, but the word has some critical value at its core. Simping is selfish. Undue expectations of another human being is self-serving. Judo and Serpico are written as incredibly perceptive, yet their personal shortcomings recontextualize that perceptive nature as a sort of tunnel vision. The selfish attitude it reinforces isn't helping anyone, and it's an unsustainable lifestyle. Hey, look at Judo. He fucking died. Selfish doesn't mean unlikable. Selfishness is just an interesting paradigm that the two characters have in markedly different ways, twisting itself with violent consequences. Judo's story was relatively simple, and while he did have his quirks and perceptive wit, most of what was interesting was the story we weren't told, the thoughts he kept hidden from the audience. Serpico picks up where Judo left off, a paralleled character of sorts, a seeming carbon copy, but his depth builds out robust and unique, where we may have been expecting another Judo, due to Berserk's power and narrative parallel. Subversion of expectation and a divergence from that parallel made Serpico wholly intriguing. The two are a pretty phenomenal pair. Of Simps.
Just a song before I go, a lesson to be learned. Traveling twice the speed of sound, it's easy to get burned.
Gantz is somebody I think anybody can love, even if they disagree with some of his toxic actions. Gantz is a character who fundamentally embodied masculine vulnerability, and even if he didn't necessarily handle it very well, more than that, his ability to carry on makes him a great beacon of hope that we're all gonna make it. Eventually we'll make it off that damn boat. One day, we might even be happy.
Kei Kurano is an incel dipshit who likes to jerk off and smell women's towels. He does some cool stuff like beating up his bullies in a super suit, but that's undone by the fact that for the first quarter of the story, he's a sniveling creep who's unsympathetic and gross. It's fitting for this reason. Many of my friends told me their favorite arc of Gantz was Osaka, when he was fucking dead. Denji is a dumbass, and a lovable dumbass at that. His utter commitment and persistence shines through to make Chainsaw Man one of the most enjoyable shonen stories I've consumed. He's not that nuanced of a character, but he stands as a beacon of emotional rawness, by far a lot funnier than most main characters, and divorces himself of needing to become a hero. Man just wants to touch some titty. Don't we all, Denji? Don't we all?
I don't know. Here's some generic stupid statement about what your profile picture says about you.
You connected deeply with one of the most powerful protagonists of all time, and you wanted to be him as a young man as you struggled to cope with intense amounts of emotional repression, which manifested itself as brutally cathartic as you browsed A, calling Darling of the Franks fans slurs. You might have some trouble with women. Okay, you literally only have trouble with women. But you still throw your hat in the arena of love. You acknowledge you're a pretty simple guy, but that humility's kind of charming in a way.
You love tits.
What if Adolf Hitler said that you're such a physical beast, dude? You're such a physical, nasty beast, dude. You're such a nasty physical beast right now, bro? I would say to myself, man, this Hitler guy is up to no good. I hate this. I can't take any more of this. I don't know what I'm gonna do. What am I gonna do? Or like Alexander the Great, if you want someone that's less, did less bad things. Wow. If Alexander the Great tells you you're his top guy, you're his top guy. You're now in a position where you have no choice but to go, oh, I'm Alexander the Great's top guy, dude. I really like Adolf Hitler. I'm an alpha male, okay? And I love what he did. I use a combination of lies, manipulation, cheating, stealing, gaslighting, bull. Here's the thing, no matter how much you disapprove of the guy, you have to be aware of, you have to admit to yourself that having someone with that level of cachet, and that level of swagger, that level of panache, that level of je ne sais quoi, that level of savoir-faire, having the eye of someone like that on you, and you're his top guy. Okay, I'll do it. I'm going to bat for you, Hitler.
My mama was raised in the era when clean water was only served to the fairer skin. Doing clothes you would've thought I had help, but they wasn't satisfied unless I picked the cotton myself. You see, it's broke, nigga, race him, that's that don't touch anything in the stove. And it's rich, nigga, race him, that's that come in, please buy more. What you want? A Bentley, fur coat, a diamond chain? All you blacks want all the same thing. Used to only be niggas, now everybody playing, spending everything on Alexander Wang, new slaves. You see his leaders and his followers, but I'd rather be a dick than a swallower. You see his leaders and his followers, but I'd rather be a dick than a swallower. I throw these Maybach keys, I wear my heart on the sleeve. I know if we the new slaves, I see the blood on the leaves. I see the blood on the leaves. I see the blood on the leaves. I know that we the new slaves, I see the blood on the leaves. They throwing hate at me, want me to stay at ease. Fuck you and your corporation, y'all niggas can't control me. I know that we the new slave, I know that we the new slave. I'm about to wild the fuck out, I'm going Bobby Boucher. I know that pussy ain't free, you niggas pussy ain't me. Y'all throwing contracts at me, you know that niggas can't read. Don't want some Maybach keys, fucking say la B. I know that we the new slave, y'all niggas can't fuck with me. Y'all niggas can't fuck with yay, y'all niggas can't fuck with yay. I move my family out the country so you can't see where I stay. So go and grab the reporters so I can smash their recorders. Sit there confused with some bullshit like the New World Order. Meanwhile the DEA Teamed up with the CCA, they try and lock niggas up, they try and make new states. See, that's that probably on prison. Get your piece today. They probably all in the Hamptons, bragging about what they made. Fuck you and your Hampton house. I fuck your Hampton spouse. Came on a Hampton blouse, and then a Hampton mouth. Y'all about to turn shit up, I'm about to tear shit down. I'm about to air shit out. Now what the fuck they gon' say now?
In Chapter 3, I discussed one of my favorite little narrative dynamics, liminality, and much like it's expertly applied in Gantz's storytelling with Sakurai, so too does it factor itself into the storytelling for our three protagonists. Whether you wish to see the bottom of a story circle as the great hurdle a hero has to face, the unconscious mind, or even a true darkness a character must enter, the general effect tends to be the same. Something is lost, something is gained, and between that exists an overwhelming emptiness. The point where these three narratives meet is that liminality is part and parcel with violence. Violence provokes it, violence maintains it, and violence is the gravitational force that at times stands to tear our heroes apart. As violence becomes conditioned, and liminality sets in, there's an adaptation, a necessary growth, the only alternative being to surrender and die. In a way that violence is controlling, and even after the change has taken shape, the force doesn't simply cease to exist. It's cursed to exist within these worlds, and from that ugliness, each narrative rears its head, equally ugly. Well, Gantz certainly has its lion's share of issues. Ultimately, one of the reasons I found it remotely gripping was Oku's ability to stumble onto a circular path of storytelling. This is even more impressive considering our main character. Meet Kei Kurano, absolute lech. When we meet him, he's an unsympathetic, self-obsessed, rampantly creepy teenager. Now what if I told you, dear viewer, that by the end of this 380 chapter debacle, you'd absolutely love him? That'd be really amazing, and I'd herald Oku as a weaver of redemption arc genius. Unfortunately, what we were blessed with wasn't so great, nor was it utterly terrible. To put it simply, it was ugly. See, once the storm settles and you reach the end of Gantz, if you're anything like me, you might look at Kei and think, wow, I can see your character in a panel and I no longer grimace. That's because, believe it or not, Oku does have bursts of genius in his work, and from that, I hesitate to write Kei off as a quote-unquote the bad of this chapter. Out of an absolute depraved and self-centered main character, a very dull and inoffensive hero is born. That ascent from intolerable to mid is a veritable achievement and growth. And growth is the essence of story. Even in the beginning, when Kei sucks, there's a modicum of inherent potential within him to become the hero. I'm not here to say that him pulling a hobo off the tracks and then getting nay-nayed on by a train immediately made me attached to his character, though. Instead, I think there's a better springboard to highlight that heroic kernel distilled within him. Gantz plays with the concept of hope as a bit of a diffusive element between people. The first time we see the baton of hope pass is in a flashback between Kei and Kato. See, when they were younger, Kei inspired Kato with his rebellious antics, challenging school bullies, and reflexively, Kato learned to be stronger.
Once again, this is paralleled visually by the first Gantz mission, where Kei boldly dives through the sky, once again reminding Kato of his inspiration. Out of this established nature though, we have to regress. Kei finds himself basking in violence, as it starts to shape his inner meaning. Much of this comes to be seen in his scummy behavior, which is actively destroying any chance he has at finding companionship or meaning in this lonely little world. This loneliness mutually reinforces him to embrace the violence of Gantz. In this case though, it's not in a way to protect people like a typical hero would. It's all for the glory. Kei's practically begging the room to pull him back. Violence begins to enthrall him, and throughout the mission he becomes a self-aggrandizing douche. That's a really brilliant point of ambiguity in the storytelling, intentional or no, because even within this abject toxic development, you can see his potential to become a hero as he rockets himself into pure danger of the large alien. However, even in this grand display of risking his life, it's ultimately bookended the same way, with Kei bragging about how he shot right through the fucker's forehead in a cocky display of his prowess. Violence molds our main character into somehow a bigger, intolerable dickhead. That is, until the story inverts and obliterates him mentally. Within the same mission, Kei and company are forced to confront various other aliens, ones that are more dangerous than the massive one. Good subversion of expectations using size there, Gantz. Proud of you. God, I feel like I'm complimenting a 4-year-old on their drawing I'm gonna pin to the fridge. Anyhow, after this, the entire team bites it to the battery acid alien. Kei's the lone survivor of this, and unsurprisingly, Homie's a little bit shocked. I, for one, will say, that's pretty reasonable, and reading Gantz for the first time, I was legitimately taken aback by how bold this development seemed at that point. It's legitimately a point of horror to leave our main character in. I don't care how awful he is. I can at least sympathize that scar will run deep. In this period, where violence first enabled his pride only to crush everything he knew, there's really only one word that can describe him now. Liminal. Kei is in his rite of passage of sorts, and the ritual is Gantz. When he's forced to go on a mission later, he's completely on his own, and out of this he continues to get pulverized. After obliterating all of his targets but one, he's effectively not only taken a physical beating, but also a mental one. At this point in the story, let's touch on a gripe I had from chapter 2. But this time, I want to provide you an alternative angle. Enter again, Tai Kojima, a young, sweet, innocent otaku. And now that I'm not tying myself down for the sake of the bit, a cute enough gal in her design. The only thing that markedly separates her aesthetically from Reika is the lack of gigantic honkers. While Oku structures her character in a relatively limiting fashion, there's still some value to their relationship. See, the inception of Kei and Tai founds itself on the fear of being alone, and the desperate urge to eliminate that consuming discomfort. It's an unrealistic and unhealthy goal to enter a relationship under the pretenses of. But that's very real. Narrative in many ways is about triumphing over setbacks that would likely stunt us in real life. Starting a relationship with the foundation of eliminating loneliness is a hapless goal, and it's likely to doom it from the start. In the narrative of Gantz, the value of the story comes from the gradual lift out of that unhealthy expectation to a true selfless love. Much like Kei starting out as an unsympathetic character, this relationship starts out with very little merit. So too, like Kei, does it gain its power by turning nothing into something. Throughout the following chapters, as Kei is still very much consumed by his liminality, he comes to emulate Kato. He encounters risk after risk in the dinosaur mission, attempting to save others by dashing into the flames. And within those flames, he finds another baton of hope, passed to him by the old man. It's been a long journey into the story at this point, and I'd say here is where Kei becomes almost bearable. And that's all due to the fact that the story has effectively redirected his character away from being a cringe lord. Gantz doesn't take a moment to celebrate this distinction, as it immediately thrusts us back into the fold, where Gantz is ordered to hit on Tai. At face value, this is a cheap manipulative tactic that doesn't make much sense other than to promote the idea that Gantz is an evil, evil world. It feels rather artificial and not narratively justified. She's not an alien, so Gantz shouldn't have a problem there. And wouldn't Kei fight better in the future if he had something to motivate him to survive? Who knows? So it goes. As everybody begins to lose their marbles, we see Kei fight to protect Tai, further cementing their relationship. This is all for naught though, because in the wake of this development, Tai perishes at the hands of the Gantz group, breaking Kei. Out of this, violence once again comes to temper our main character, an inescapable reality that silently guides him. Within that development, Kei has new meaning now, and he's living to save his girlfriend.
I guess the Gantz ball predicted that would happen or some shit, I don't know.
Now Kei's running with the baton of hope to reject violence as a means of control. He goes on to achieve this by saving Kato and Tai. Through his bravery, his teammates reward him by using their points to save those two, allowing Kei to exit Gantz and live in peace with his girlfriend. It seems our little tale is wrapping up neatly, and Kei's gone through his change. He's become bearable. As it stands, Gantz has told us the story it needed to. Now for happily ever after.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
A false moment of security is befuddled by violence pulling our protagonist right back in. Just after being able to escape the room, a hit is put out on Kei, as these dipshit vampires come to kill him. And then they do. For a good minute following this development, Kei is out of the narrative entirely. I can't exactly blame my friends who love the Osaka arc due to his absence. Still, there's a benefit to the absence beyond that. While Kei was just barely scratching the surface of bearable preceding this arc,
he's nowhere close to likable yet. It's not as though I've forgotten the cringy loser he was at the start of the story. By including a period of reprieve from King Crimson in the court of the Incel King, he's far more bearable following his resurrection. Despite Gantz trying to be built different in its weird nihilistic ways, it's pretty obvious Oku wouldn't go so far as to abandon his main character. Indeed, Kei comes back directly following Osaka, just in time to learn that he's got a week left until the heat death of the fucking universe. We'll get to that more in our last chapter. For now, I'll say, this is a really brilliant way of making me not have to think about Kei at all as a character. By ramping up the pace here, there's no chance at him becoming an abject loser again. He can just remain in the lukewarm neutral position in my brain as perfectly mid. That's gotta be it, right? Oh god, there's 100 chapters left. Well, almost immediately following this revelation, there's a bit of deja vu. That's the word for blatant redundancy, right? Anyway, Reika's once again confessing to Kei that she loves him deeply, and once again, Kei's rejecting her. Look, Kei's come a long way from his days fighting in the incel trenches. He's bearable now. And I get how Oku was likely framing the story such that Reika's love for him was meant to be an externality caused by his heroic antics. Nevertheless, her position in Japanese stardom, coupled with the fact that she's seemingly grounded her love for him entirely in one aspect of his personality, comes off as artificial. Their relationship is meant to be artificial at heart. In fact, a few chapters later, Reika goes on to fully clone Kei so that she can be with him. You heard me right. There are now 2 Ks in the narrative, and you know what? When there was just one of them, I was almost convinced it was bearable. As they say though, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, no you won't, go fuck yourself, Oku! It doesn't help that Clone Kei goes sicko mode and reverts to the same whiny bitch incel he once was. While this comes off again as further affirmation towards Kei's feelings towards Tai, it doesn't make him any less unbearable. His character is further undermined by his sus activity where he jumps Reika in bed, but this time she likes him, so he's forced to ponder this for a bit. See, Kei now gets to grapple with the idea that this was probably just like female Kei's experience when she lived with him. He's Reika's pet after all. Hey, that's pretty progressive, right? Roles reversed. Haha, woke moment. Take that, foolish man, take your punishment. Which is, to pipe a supermodel? Ugh. Look, bit aside, I can appreciate this might come off relatively toxic of me, as my Chainsaw Man Chapter 2 dialogue sort of puts this dynamic in perspective. Still, I'm gonna go out on a whim here. I'm gonna look at all of Oku's other work and say he was probably not trying to dissect, or at least he's not effectively dissecting, sympathetic masculine pain here. I don't really know how to say this, but I have difficulty feeling pity for a man stripped of his deeper love and rationalizing that into him being averse to sex when he was showing, you know, real enthusiastic, perhaps too enthusiastic consent a few minutes ago. You know, it kinda divorces me from pitying him for his penance of supermodel piping. Earlier in this essay, I lamented over how Oku squandered his potential for an interesting subversion with the main character not being awarded some prime beauty, but rather ending up with a cute if not unremarkable love interest. The reason he dropped the ball, of course, being that he felt a need to diegetically comment on this motif as much as possible, making it seem almost entirely unnatural. Had he just let Sleeping Dogs lie and allowed the art to speak for itself, maybe less people would have picked up on it, but for those who did, it would have been a cute, untraditional story. While up to this point, I thought it was pretty weakly implemented, I still admired the basic premise. Now though, any ounce of meaning that remained is entirely cast aside, as Kei is effectively having his cake and eating it too. In one timeline, he gets to live out a brief yet torrid love affair with a literal supermodel, and in the other, he's able to live with the girl he loves. It's such indecisive, despicable, bitch-made writing on Oku's part. Alright, let's try to wrap this up before I impulsively call Gantz the bad. Violence remains a pervasive mechanism of control throughout the final chapters of the manga, as it had since the beginning. We ultimately glimpse this in its most grand fashion right before the end, inside the giant Gantz mechs, the proverbial devil trigger of the story. These mechs crash towards a tower they must destroy to eliminate the threat of invasion. It's almost brilliantly ugly how much this inescapable chaotic violence permeates through every facet of Kei's development. This tempering flame of violence is what makes his an effective story, and it's what enables me to say, Oku pulled off a Herculean feat. Kei Kurano grew from an indecisive whiny incel into an unremarkable inoffensive hero, and while I think the gap between him and the greater two ugly protagonists of this video is quite wide, I still have to give credit to Oku for imbuing his character with tremendous growth. Chainsaw Man's lovable protagonist Denji rules, but much like Gantz, there's a pervasive ugly hand pulling the strings from behind the curtain. At the start though, that hand's relatively obvious. Our boy is saddled in immense debt, out of options, and then, within that constrained environment, Makima offers Denji a route out. Our inciting incident is simple enough. Denji seemed like he was just gonna get cooked, but Makima, she proved otherwise.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Out of that route of poverty, Denji goes on to meet his supporting cast. The first two, his surrogate siblings, don't exactly get off to the smoothest start as a family. They've all got a lot of growing to do to become closer to one another. But before that, Power needs to get her cat back. Why the hell would Denji care about a cat? After all, Denji only cares to solve Makima's problems. Well, Power gives a pretty great counterpoint for pussy.
Just when I thought I was out, they pulled me back in.
Denji solves that issue only to find himself utterly unsatisfied with the quid pro quo, as it's rather hollow. Perhaps life is going to be as empty and passionless as when he was a street urchin. Once again, Makima proves otherwise. As our main character returns to his down bad homeostasis, he's grown to realize that his expectations can only be met in intimacy within understanding. Therefore, bada bing bada boom Himeno, I've mentioned this twice already. After a series of emotional twists, and subsequent crushed expectations for Denji, the brevity of the narrative sours. I love brevity. Denji's been established, and now the violent liminality of the world of Chainsaw Man is about to take hold. Denji gets absolutely nay-nayed on in the Gun Devil's first assault, unlike previous sections where his immortality brings him back, allowing him to triumph over his adversaries with little consequence. The deaths of his comrades here are of tangible weight. While Denji doesn't register this for reasons I went over in the first chapter, from a broader view this is a brilliant place to start out the overall regression of his character into an abyss where he can be built back up. In true Chainsaw Man fashion, that rite of passage is marked with ruthlessly entertaining violence. This shonen training montage isn't just marked with sweat and tears, but the great power obtained through that struggle. It's a gore-addled romp led by a psychotic alcoholic asshole. This is a prime liminality. It's a great point to delve into the bottom half of Denji's story. As a character who already felt hollow, who was only led by his base instincts and id, when Denji shows some tactful prowess in this scene, that's already something being built up in our protagonist from nothing. More than anything though, it's just really special to see these two endearing dumbasses put their heads together and plot out a methodical galaxy brain tier route to get their dub. But the dividends of Denji's wit aren't realized in this scene, as Kishibe still beats their asses. Down the line, the growth's more measurable. When Denji once again faces off with the Knife Devil, this time he's the one naying the nay. By feigning greater dumbassery than he holds, and audibly telegraphing his moves to the Knife Devil, he reflexively learns from his loss to Kishibe. He learns to deceive.
Conniving is an interesting dynamic to take with the shonen protagonist.
And in a character that's pretty empty, while his methods were rather crude, there's a power growing within him. It's fitting that within this descent, we find out about the inherent trauma within Denji, albeit it's a mystery. The door is ominous and foreboding, something you must never open, something locked, an evil within. Aside from my socialist hypothesis on violence, which I'd argue is in line with what lingers beyond the door, this is the most tangible in-story justification for Denji's cold heart. It's a rationale for his repression, dissociation, and subsequent emptiness. The comfort of his life where all his basic needs are covered has already started changing due to the liminal provocation within the violence of the world. Wherever that growth may lead, it spurred him to have to acknowledge the ambiguous gravity of whatever lies behind that door. In the midst of being ripped apart emotionally to be built back up, Denji's base needs being covered as the status quo is no longer something he can be content with. With his worldview shaken, Denji goes looking for answers. In the point of perfect dark within the world, Denji finds Makima. While Makima accelerates his growth for less than altruistic reasons, she also calms his heart and the storm brewing within him.
His heart's affirmed, and he's slowly growing into a person worthy of the one he loves.
I'm not at the beaches.
Enter Reze, a brilliant little character to stir things up. Of course, Denji's a changed man. This time he'll certainly hold true to his dedication to Makima.
Just when I thought I was out.
Denji falls for Reze quickly. After all, in a way, she's everything he could ever unconsciously want. Throughout his time with the Bureau, Denji's been subjected to endless violence. And out of that, the trauma hiding in his psyche is slowly surfaced. If Denji wants to avoid that door, Makima will be the one to accelerate its opening. It's almost fated that he has to betray her. Still, there's a dissonance within Denji. Overtly speaking, this fear he wants to escape is superseded by the relative comforts he's come to know working with the Bureau. In a stroke of well-appropriated symbolism, Reze discusses the parable of the town mouse versus the country mouse. One who prefers intense comfort and higher risk, the other who lives with less luxury but more security. Denji is the town mouse, once again defaulting to his beliefs that bread and jam are necessary luxuries. Logically then, he shouldn't be drawn away from Makima. Perhaps Denji's just down bad yet again. But no, it's deeper than that. Sure, Denji's being horny on main, no doubt, but ultimately the reason he opts for the town mouse is because in his eyes, the premise itself is flawed. When you've been conditioned to live in perpetual risk, the abstract concept of security is alien to you. When he's been indoctrinated by the relative luxury of his life at the Bureau, why would he discard that for something he can't even rationalize? Denji is the town mouse, because the town is what he knows. Denji also knows the feeling of crushed expectations, and in the wake of Reze exposing herself as a true fraud, the town mouse once again dances. The fight with the Bomb Devil ensues, and the ever-growing portfolio of Denji's crushed expectations come to a head, fully igniting a vengeful light within him. Throughout this fight, Denji stunts on her. Homie is whipping a shark. As much as he might be suffering mentally through this fight, the violence reflects this in its utter indulgence. As the fight ends, we're subject to Denji's true desires. At the end of all this hormonal angst, betrayal, and strife, the town mouse still yearns for a life he can't comprehend. See, Denji articulates this as him not being able to help but love Reze. The reason he can still love her and Makima simultaneously is because there's an implicit understanding of the hidden consequences of Makima. Maybe Denji can't consciously realize this, but Reze trying to pull him out, even if it was only an illusion, was an alternative to the perpetual violence Makima throws him into. It's a well-done narrative reflection of the fear that grows in the dark, toxic relationship. His dependence on Makima is something he wants to go ahead and shed for undue consequences, but in the end, there's no escape for the town mouse. Reze meets her end against Makima, and the hopes for Denji's escape out of the city, unlikely as they were, are now completely deafened. In the end, we get an interesting parable with Angel, a country mouse forced to live in the chaos of the city. From an alien perspective, the city mouse is trapped by entropic violence, conditioned to believe it's its only viable route, while the intoxicating pageantry of escapes within that city inundate the mouse with delusions of a life well lived. Ultimately, it's always trapped. Makima is the embodiment of that entrapment, and she kills the country mouse because it counters her unilateral view on how life should be lived. Freedom is an ambiguous state, full of potential for chaos, and Makima wants to end that chaos, snuffing out any alternative narrative to a dominant unilateral structure. The story moves on. The controlling hand of violence has guided our main character to a fate doomed by the Bureau. In this, a veritable death march of assassins come chasing after Denji. 3 of these are assassins from the US, brothers, also a product of their environment. They are victims of the Gun Devil, providing a foil to Aki, but where his survival provoked a suicidal urge for revenge, their survival provoked an intense feeling of strength in their persistence. The 3 brothers, who seem to be a worthy set of opponents for Denji. Anyway, following this humorous entry, the best arc of Chainsaw Man plunges Denji lower. At the lowest point in his story, Denji finds himself growing. It's a bit cliche, but in defeating the darkness, devil, he illuminates the start of his journey back up to the surface. In finding this light, the trauma that had been buried deep within Denji is illuminated once again. In the wake of this chaos, Denji is reminded of the door he's practically doomed to open. Violence, growth, and Makima's goals are all pushing him to this moment. Through this, he finds his path upwards. This is all staggered by the great tragedy of the beginning of the end, as Denji is forced to kill Aki. Another family member being killed creeps him closer to the doorway. While Denji is ignorant to his true feelings due to scars and repression, the path upwards towards his ultimate change isn't a smooth one. As with any good story, the point opposite his inciting incident is the last straw preventing change, pushing him 2 steps back. Ultimately, challenged by his true self, Denji opts for the calm allure of peace, foregoing control to Makima. At this point, of course, we're well aware that Makima's evil. What comes to be is a consolidation and affirmation that all the violence and suffering Denji's come to endure has been orchestrated by her, the hand guiding Denji to break him. The true last straw catapulting Denji to his genesis is Power's death, and an acknowledgement of that trauma, thrusting the door wide open. It's a full realization of the bleak reality of the world. Denji killed his own father, perhaps out of spite or reflex. Regardless, I still find myself beyond sympathetic to Denji, as beyond being screwed by the system, he's now got separate survivor's guilt for both lives he's lived. This trauma kicks him into his double trigger, the fullest realization of the intoxicating control of violence. He becomes the visage of that chaos, a malevolent force, and honestly, as tragic as this outcome is, it maintains the same thrill Chainsaw Man always did. As the violent world has rendered him completely destroyed, perhaps emptier than ever, Denji is born anew, darker than dark. Aided by love from Power, Denji's able to pull himself out of DT. This is going to let him make a decision for himself, not just to subsist, but to achieve a true goal. To have the most sex. From Denji's life in a debt prison, to the thrashing conflict of a violent malevolent flame, he's met his rite of passage, and emerged a fully realized person. In this actualization, he finally gets to meet Makima on equal footing, her spell broken. A man shaped by violence now gets to reject it, as he's found a way out of its vice grip. The fight manages to scale to a peak I would have thought unthinkable after the kinography that was the Darkness Devil. It's a perfectly fitting cherry on top of the sundae of Denji's growth, as 2 invincible beings duke it out, repeatedly killing one another, showing how incomprehensible the violence we've witnessed up to this point truly is. The reason this peak is so wonderfully fitting is that it's infinite. There's no logical way either of these 2 will give in, and they have the means to continue. Makima will never accept Denji as the arbiter of Chainsaw Man.
And Chainsaw Man, well, he chose Denji to lead the revolution.
You cannot say no to someone in that position like Chainsaw Man.
Ultimately, this unreachable peak is exhausted, and we fall to a rather unsatisfying conclusion. Denji has his heart ripped out, like he has so often throughout the story. Perhaps it's a fitting tragedy, though. Chainsaw Man has once again subverted our expectations. The glorious delusions of grandeur manic violence builds up will always be stunted by reality crashing down. This is yet another violent exit. Even our hero wasn't immune from the unfairness of the world. All is lost. Gotta hold myself together for this part. Alright, here it goes. In the wake of crushed expectations, we get the sickest panel of the entire series. Denji pops out, fully suited, full bureau attire, looking like a goddamn G, holding a chainsaw of his own, outwitting Makima and ripping into her. Okay, honestly, nobody expected this wasn't going to twist back to positive. In fact, it's an act foreshadowed in the very first cover of the manga. But regardless, it's raw. Denji's growth to deceive has been an inherent part of his development through the entire narrative. In the end, he handles this in an intense act of self-awareness, realizing Makima never loved him for him. It's pretty heartbreaking that in order to fully achieve his goals, he has to work on facts that inherently hurt him. But his path to find tact, as a complete dumbass, is fitting. In Chainsaw Man, Denji has to burst through a wall like the goddamn Kool-Aid Man in order to satiate his urges. These urges are often unrequited, his expectations shattered, and in each successive instance of that, he learns. Earlier I discussed how Oku's reliance on false peaks became tired, ultimately hurting my reading experience. In Chainsaw Man, shattered expectations become the convention much like false peaks are for Oku. However, the consistent unreliable nature of the actors that fall into Denji's life had me on my toes reading, more enamored of figuring out how things would go wrong next. That structure underscoring his growth fits together in a three-part framework: expectations, outcomes, and the dissonance between those two, a violence that pushes and pulls him.
In Denji's growth within violence, he learns the mechanism of control within said violence hinges on expectations. In order to become the hero he is by story's end, he learns to hijack those expectations for his own goals, and becomes a master of violence.
Why don't we wrap up character development with the best protagonist of all time? We'll be here all day if I try to run through Berserk in terms of every single arc, and beyond that, it'd be a bit redundant. As I've said throughout the essay, it's a whole lot of self-referentiality fueling this train. Seeing the same story for decades speaks to the underlying strength of that story, since it don't get old. Considering that, I just want to tackle two arcs that I think do a really wonderful job of painting Guts' character, contending with the violence that pervades this story. The Black Swordsman arc is raw as hell. Guts cuts a dude clean in half in the first chapter, which gives you an immediate sense of scale, and that just keeps growing, in a gripping and believable way. Black Swordsman rules. If you disagree, you are wrong, because the arc serves the series really well in retrospect. Here's why. At the start of the story, we meet Guts, who seems to bask masochistically in pain he's entrapped by. I don't have to gush about how the story builds into a nice liminality, since the start of the story thrusts us right into the thick of the downward plummet. Throughout the arc, Guts always seems to find himself fighting off an endless horde, maintaining the never-ending violence. When this inescapable reality guides Guts to end a child, there's an immediate gravity comparatively to the faceless hordes prior to this. Upon first look, this might seem to be but a narratively manipulative moment, a hyperbolically evil action to force us to feel something. Only upon comparing this to Lost Children and the Golden Age does this recontextualize to its full weight. Comparing A to B to C, it's clear that from the Golden Age to this point, Guts isn't completely gone. He still feels some of the weight of his actions. From B to C, however, there's an intuitive understanding that the second encounter with the God Hand broke Guts. Miura wrote this without any plans for Guts' assassination backstory in the Golden Age, playing a perfect balancing act between both moments. Regardless, it's consistent. End of the day, that's what matters. After another fight with an apostle, we see Guts using his last trump card, the arm cannon. Once again, Guts makes like a ragdoll to take the dub, putting his all into punishing the icons of his doom. Only with that absolute beatdown does the behavior get activated, and with that, Guts plunges into the God Hand. The God Hand's dimension is wicked and warped, looks straight out of a Cubist painting, with stark shadows crossing over the architecture, provoking a foreboding atmosphere. It's probably valid to note here that Miura has been quoted in interviews as saying he drew a lot of inspiration from the painter M.C. Escher. This translates into his work in excessive contrast and blunt line nature that permeates through the details of the world of Berserk, from the beginning. In the midst of this perfectly curated foreboding atmosphere, Guts enters the place where his goal can become actualized. He can finally face the God Hand, but he's weak by his own haphazard, bullish attitude, and that dooms him to sink lower in defeat. Guts willing himself to stand against the God Hand through his crippling pain is enough to prove that there's horribly bad blood, spurred from levels of pride between the two. It also shows that Griffith is a heartless, inquisitive bastard. Guts' manic rage pouring into him to pull the blade down at Griffith again defines weight to the Dragon Slayer that Guts normally swings effortlessly. Even not knowing what the brand is yet, or what the God Hand are, or the context of all this enthralling visual stimulus, none of it feels out of place. It all feels fated to be. In the last chapter of The Black Swordsman, regardless of prior intention, The girl, Teresa, has come to hate Guts. In his own way, Guts shoulders her hatred, being an icon to keep her alive in hatred for him, much like he survives in his hatred for Griffith. The arc ends with Guts subtly crying, a quiet ending to a violent section. Is Guts crying because he's had to shoulder another person's hatred? Or because he's doomed this poor little girl to the same unsustainable flame that burns out his heart and soul as well? The ambiguous outcome ultimately seeds the same result. Pain. Guts internalizes it, wiping away his tears, stumbling out to face his next inevitable conflict. Berserk is a story of pain, and this arc is the perfect dark to the underside of his perfect return to glory. We return to that glory amidst the Witch's Grove, where Guts begins to truly embrace his new family. In his redemption, he comes to learn to work as a unit, and trust those in his new group to do their part as well. Out of that, Guts dives into the Troll's Cave, initially with pure determination to save Casca, and unfortunately, he becomes consumed by rage, brought on by an apostle lying deep below. Without this dissonant framework, the pull of familial ties clashing against endless anger, Guts' development at the peak of the Witch's Grove would not fit nearly as well. Out of the darkness of the Black Swordsman, out of the hope of the Golden Age, out of the ambiguity that the story now stands on the prefaces of, the ugliness of Berserk's character development rears its magnificent head. The greatest challenge ahead, a forest full of apostles beckons, a fight midst being mortally wounded, akin to the same bad hand he was dealt facing the God Hand in Black Swordsman. Guts now needs access to a deeper power, one that will have the consequence of continually pulling him to and fro, never letting him truly balance, or find peace. Behold, Guts' Devil Trigger.
Bury the light deep within. Cast aside, there's no coming home. We're burning chaos in the wind, drifting in the ocean.
It's fitting that in the inverse to the Black Swordsman, where we see Guts' shreds of humanity interspersed throughout the darkness of the depths of the first arc's descent, within his rise, in this arc after 2 decades of publication, there's a pernicious darkness, buried deep within that light of hope. That darkness, the Berserker armor, comes to bury the light. Like Gantz's suits, and the giant iteration that comes by story's end, where the Chainsaw Devils form in full glory, the Berserker armor comprises an entrapment from the allure of violence. Guts can bury his pain. He can resign himself to the blood flow he once knew so intimately. Allowing himself to be enraptured in this, he finds himself free. Poetically, there's a strikingly similar visual earlier in the story. Within Griffith's transformation to Femto, Griffith finds himself rippling like a flame. So too in the wake of the Berserker armor's terror, Guts is engulfed by a swirl of flames as well. As Griffith is coming to his own, he talks to the Demon of Death, as the fabric of his being is woven together. Likewise, Guts hears similar whispers from the Berserker armor. These peering eyes, the dark intoxicating atmosphere, this negative emotional valence, this violence, the toxic glory both of them have bathed in, is one and the same. Violence twisted Griffith's path to get him all the way to his dream. So too does the Berserker armor provide Guts the means to be on course to clash against Griffith, 2 unstoppable forces. In order to grow, Guts must learn to fight his nature, to become bigger than the violence that pulled the strings of causality. The hawk and the dog, fated to live in eternal strife. That's the paradigm the Berserker armor presents. With it comes a curse. On the surface, degradation of Guts' life, as his body will come to be consumed by the armor, the longer he becomes Berserk. Below the surface of the story, a greater threat looms, the degradation of his soul. This all hinges on the trial he's faced since the eclipse. Which is more sacred, hatred or rejection in favor of love? The suit certainly serves to actualize the first. He can become free, reject all mortal constraints, hurdle every tribulation, and become a demon worthy of facing Griffith. Or, perhaps in a greater Herculean feat than defeating a god, he can reject all of that and find something deeper. As Guts is pulled out of the armor, he's presented an alternative route, a rejection of that violence to be with his new family, to revive Casca and make herself whole once again. There is another path, salvation, walking away, but the armor ensures that on that path, he'll always feel the heat of the flames burn. This is hardly the last rodeo for Guts. Hardly the last dive into the intrepid appeal of a submission to controlling violence. Each descent into Berserk madness is another he can't get back. It's another flip back to zero on the last day since gone Berserk sign. Learning to throw less than his entire being into a fight is a new trick for this old dog. Through this, Berserk illuminates the greatest expression violence can chisel. It is the unending dissonance between two equally desirable ideas, and that gravitational pull, tearing a person apart. It is the allure of beautiful panels of boundless pain, constantly drawing my engagement. It is a reflection of that, chastising me for falling into the same fallacious pitfalls of the narrative. Guts rose from an unbelievable low, and the power of the greatest protagonist making his journey over 20 years is feeling the weight of those invigorating moments. And I mean every damned one of them. Keep Black Swordsman out of your mouth if you dare disrespect it. Look, I could have walked through every damned arc of this manga, and I would have fucking loved it. I would have abused that Al Pacino clip one more time when Guts left the Band of Hawk, only to have to come back. That clip meant to show the control of violence, common between the three narratives. And beyond that, each arc would have provided me panels that would have shown narrative as well as visual symmetry. I want to rage on for hours and hours and hours about Berserk, and maybe that's the ugliest thing about it. It's unfinished, and yet it's prompted enough feeling to last a lifetime. As this video finds itself coming to a close, what better time to talk about conclusions? The narrative point that allows for a great retrospective on character development and world building an author has curated to crescendo all to that perfect moment. It's no surprise then, when you reach that point, if material before then has been lackluster, it's all the more important to recontextualize it, such that the tension of the narrative knot pulls you back in for one strong last note on a series. Likewise, if the material up to this point has been prolific and unabashedly based, the intense pressure riding on that conclusion being quote-unquote correctly handled is an almost impossible act, with expectations building on it to a point of being too big to fail. Expectations will be the death of us as an audience. They prevent us from fully enjoying keynote little moments because of stupid little what-ifs that don't exist in art. So on a note of obfuscating expectations, let's turn to our good, an ending that fucking rips. Chainsaw Man's ending imbues itself with the same cynicism, crushed expectations, and utter hilarity that carried the rest of the narrative to that point. In the throes of Denji's apathetic detachment from life, Makima carries out her plan of manipulation, and in that we're met with Denji's explosion as the Chainsaw Devil, the harbinger of absolution, the one who can destroy other devils. Out of that, we get arguably one of Fujimoto's more lackluster bits of social commentary, painting Makima as a ruthless utilitarian, speaking of how she'll hijack the Chainsaw Man to render the world's problems obsolete. Still, this plan's a little bit short-sighted. Many of the problems that plague our real world have been nixed by the Chainsaw Man, and yet they still live in a late-stage capitalist hellscape. There might be an underlying problem with humanity if Chainsaw Man obliterated Nazis, nuclear weapons, and fucking AIDS, and the world's still bunk.
It's a shame he can't eat the capitalism, devil.
So when people say to me, let sleeping dogs lie, I say to them, friend, sleeping dogs, they eventually wake up and chew out the throat of democracy.
More importantly, our main character's psyche still exists, albeit shattered, with the Chainsaw Man below. See, in the midst of this violent crash, Denji just really wants Borger, and the Chainsaw Man will save him by satiating his desires. When the story has reached its first climax, Chainsaw Man does what it does best, dashing expectations with joviality, sending the Chainsaw Man into a fast food joint. This bit rules, as we get some absolutely Kino Kobeni moments as she repeatedly drops the same burger, dooming every piece of shit wage-cooked pig in that establishment to bite it. Then in the vein of Denji's desires for titty, the two go on a date, and Kobeni's forced to DDR her heart out, only looking back to reveal her apocalyptic companion has vanished.
Within this development, I can feel the heat of the manic embers of that violent flame that's roared out of control within the story. After a lot of blood, Denji, aided by the Chainsaw Devil, the purest manifestation of violence, seeks out oxygen and another spark. While I can't say that I fully understand Fujimoto's mental state writing this, what I can say is that beyond consistent internal meaning with violence, this is a rather pitch-perfect representation of an overwhelming adolescence. And I'll be damned if it isn't funny as hell. In the midst of heavy-handed social commentary, levity is a godsend.
Out of this period of levity, emotions come crashing back down to earth. In Power's revival, we get to see the full actualization of her character that was left incomplete in her blunt exit. Out of the brutally platonic energy of Denji drinking her blood, we get a foil to Makima. Sex without love is how you manifest a pure visage of toxicity, and love without sex is illustrated through Power's sacrifice. Her sacrifice isn't in vain. Her story ties to a close with the second wind of validation for Denji, allowing him to feel the love he desperately needed. Much like Himeno before her, Power's story completes after her initial exit, in a final little punch, in parallel with the power of Nia's. She'll live on through Denji, and God, I can't wait for part 2. With the final bit of energy and affirmation of his existence, Denji's now at full strength. Primed to fight with Makima, we see the last bit of her unreasonable nature, painting her utilitarian vision to be an unwieldy beast in its scope. Makima won't even allow mediocre movies to exist anymore, allowing life to lose any edge. This moment's comically evil, but it does a good job of painting an empathetic understanding of how Makima came to be the way she was. Like Denji, she too lacked any love. That lack of love warping her into a carnal evil only serves to strengthen Fujimoto's messaging on healthy relationships, humanizing a rather irredeemable character. After an unreachable climax is peaked with undeterred Kino, the story descends for a landing, and in trademark Fujimoto strangeness, Denji literally has to eat Makima to eliminate her from the world. Oftentimes throughout Chainsaw Man, the symbolic emotions underpinning the plot outran the beats of the story by a mile. That's why, folks.
Doing my best not to pull an Army Hammer here.
The end of Chainsaw Man feels utterly romantic. In an effort to eliminate Makima from the world, Denji has to eat her. And in a ritualistic manner, he meal preps the love of his life, describing the experience as, quote, "So this is how you taste." It's a strangely sexual ending, and the two can finally be closer than they ever really were. Makima now having let her guard down. Unsurprisingly, since she's fucking dead. Symbolically though, it's love, as Denji is lifting her burden of fixing an unfixable world. Chainsaw Man is a story of unrequited love. It's a true pain you feel even in the most romantic moments the two share at the very end of the story. Just as Makima freed Denji from the prison of poverty, so too did Denji free Makima from the prison of her own unreasonable expectations. They both grow, painting the cathartic value in a story told being better than no story at all. Denji could have just died in that dumpster. He could have never had to know the good life, only to have it taken away. But he also never would have been able to grow from that pain, to become his own person either. Unrequited love is not a meaningless venture. Out of toxic and hostile situations, you can learn to love yourself a bit more. And Denji's warpath, to not only learn to love himself, but also live with the skeletons in his closet, he comes to be a better man for it. It's brutal that part of learning to love himself comes with an inescapable self-awareness that forced him to bank his plans on Makima not ever truly loving him for him. Even knowing that heartbreaking factor, Denji chose to run with it. He chose himself. The great philosopher Ki Glock once mused, "I'll never ever put a bitch before my money. I'll never put a bitch before my money on my mommy. Yeah, you've got the wrong youngin', baby, I am not no dummy. You know how I'm coming, bitch, I keep them commas comin'." The kernel of truth between Ki Glock and Fujimoto's messages,
aside from blatant misogyny,
is that self-love triumphs over all. Instead of folding to a crushing reality, Denji moved forward. He banked his truth not on his own expectations of how he'd want people to act, but on a keen understanding of how they worked. Denji chose himself, and in that, he became a hero. Chainsaw Man is brief, and the conclusion didn't outstay its welcome. It ramps up efficiently and delivers a high-stakes manic knot that untangles itself in such a way that it feels earned. To a degree, this is because, in its scope, you can tell Fujimoto had his ending in mind from the beginning of the work. The story itself feels strong, not only because the beats are tight, funny, and enrapturing in their violence, it's also because, while this violence often feels otherworldly, the emotional foundation is a true sense of gravity. You can feel Fujimoto's connection to Makima. She has an emotionally realized aura, and her captivating nature from the jump perfectly aligns with the tragedy of the story. While it's hardly the last conclusion we'll ever see from Chainsaw Man, the first one gave me about all I could ever ask from it. While I'm worried Mappa's adaptation will underwhelm me, it doesn't really matter, because the buzz of those blades are right around the corner in part 2. And if Fujimoto pulled some out-of-pocket shit like that in Jump, Lord knows how ham he'll go in Jump Plus. The story is ugly, the emotions are unwieldy, overwhelming, and unapologetic, but ugliness is based. And I love Chainsaw Man. Gantz's conclusion is an absolute mess, and that's the fault of one major issue. In Oku's trademark style of false peaks, another problem emerges with the arcs at large. Without a lull or a moment's reprieve, a story can feel rather weightless. While that probably serves to benefit a lot of the thematic chaos in the middle of the story, it needs to be reined in for the conclusion of a long-form work, to leave some impact, lest it feel, dare I say, pointless? Conclusions are meant to be grounded. They can be ambiguous, but even that ambiguity should have some relative weight and sense of connection to a beginning of a story. Gantz's ending feels like Starship Troopers, without any satire, and like 2001: A Space Odyssey, without any of the brilliance. Allow me to explain. Starship Troopers is a campy little movie about brave soldiers going to wage war against an evil corps of aliens and to defend humanity by any means necessary. Throughout the movie, there are many trials and tribulations our brave ragtag team must face, but ultimately, they go on to defeat the space bugs and gain peace and glory for humanity. On the other hand, 2001: A Space Odyssey is a methodical, slow burn through a psychological hell of a spaceship. And you know what? I haven't watched it in a really long time,
and I can't be fucked to spend 3 hours on this movie. I won't even do that even though I claim Kubrick is my favorite director, which for the record gets me approximately negative pussy.
Anyway, through the true symbolic visual storytelling, the end renders itself a brilliant open-ended provocative statement, and ultimately it sets an enigmatic cherry atop an ambiguous sundae. At least I think that's how it went. So what do these two films have to do with Gantz's conclusion? Well, it attempts to appropriate similar themes of both, but in completely the wrong way. Where glory over the bugs at the end of Troopers is meant to be a satirical refute of fascist sentiment, Gantz's conclusion has certain grotesque behavior of Gantz soldiers towards aliens. But then it unironically has a glory-filled happy ending, leaving itself completely tone-deaf. On the other hand, Gantz also has a moment in the ending where humanity is met with a higher power. Only here, the abstract messages of 2001 are cast aside for weird didactic statements that seem like an edgy middle schooler wrote them. In both cases, what you get is an ending that feels reminiscent of great things, botched with the tact of a toddler painting on nitrous oxide. We're going to touch on both of these developments in a bit. For now, let's step back. As previously mentioned, the indicator for the conclusion of Gantz is the catastrophe timer. What I didn't touch on is that during this countdown, we don't spend that much time with Kei. No, instead we spend time with our good pal Nishi. This part's a bit rough, so forgive me if I'm a little bit broad. Nishi has a little incident at school, a bit of a disagreement with his entire class, which peaks in them throwing him out a third-story window. However, he was wearing a Gantz suit, and in retaliation, he Gantzes all over that school, if you catch my drift. Look, I get the point. The development's meant to signal the total decay of the world, but on the whole, this moment is so cheap that it's just another shit brick in the fecal foundation of the nihilistic diegetic diarrhea. It's just a lackluster attempt to ramp things up to a point that's so dour and meaningless that the mission that follows is purely empty in feeling. There are other better ways to do this. In fact, just don't. Wouldn't it effectively signal how random and chaotic life is if the catastrophe just came out of the blue? No warning. Let's say right when the characters were finding happiness. Just because you really want to emphasize the point that God is dead, and you have a sociopathic character with a name so homophonic to the way that I used to mispronounce Nietzsche, doesn't mean that you have to abuse him for shock value. Here's a tagline for Gantz: just don't. The mission following Nishi's little tantrum is honestly pretty Kino in comparison. It's violent and off-putting. The Gantz ballroom is completely out of sorts, signaling a foreboding beginning of the end. And the angel aliens' designs are so tight. The choice of Italy was a great selection, since Oku was laying really hard on appropriating God is dead throughout this arc of the story. With that considered, what better place to establish that theme than one where appropriation of Christian iconography is relevant? The entire chapter just reads so utterly psychotic that you can't help but feel yourself swell up in this tornado of anxiety. I really want to sing Gantz's praises here, because for the next 70 chapters, I'm going to be tearing it a new one. But here's the reality of the situation. One of Gantz's strongest assets towards my narrative read is just that after so many cheap blows, I've become numb to whatever the narrative might throw at me. While I'm genuinely disgusted with how manipulative and lazy Nishi's outburst was leading up to this arc, I'm also tired of everything. So even a passably decent story development following is enough to reinforce my suppression of all the nauseating memories of past Gantz. Meanwhile, in Germany... God, why? Anyway, meanwhile, in Germany, the Gantz Ball factory is revealed, and we are finally going to get some questions answered. See, in our new setting, the Gantz investigative reporter, remember him? Oh, that's right, I didn't mention him. We'll see, a while back when Kei dies, it's because this reporter sells him out to the vampires, but then he warns Kei that they're coming. That's a lot of information. So to sum it up, how do we feel about this character? Well, he's the prototypical Oku throwaway. While his rationale is logically sound, in that he's trying to save his own ass by selling Kei out, and then feels guilty and tries to fix it, this ultimately says nothing about his character. Normally, I would just ignore him, and it wouldn't be a big deal. Unfortunately, when you use him to receive the entire exposition dump to answer secrets of your entire 300-chapter narrative, I am predisposed to feel no fucking way about that information. While we're off on the wrong foot here, ultimately the secrets of Gantz could be so gripping that they overcome the mediocre setup. We start off with a really cool house, with dramatic renderings of biblical destruction wrought all over the walls. This is a gripping setting. It's promising. Oku, what is this? What the fuck is this? Why? Just why? Okay, so there's an obese woman on the bed, and she's Rain Man apparently. She spits out random numbers, and somehow they realize these long strings of numbers were not merely the byproduct of mental disability, but rather could be decoded to produce the Gantz balls. That's it? Wait, seriously?
That's it? What the hell, Oku? Why did you even act like you were going to answer anything? Where did the Gantz men come from? Why did you start placing black balls all over the world? How does any of this make sense? Why couldn't you write anything better? I still don't know what Sebastian is meant to be. Is he an alien or one of the Gantz men? Regardless, he flies a plane into a fucking building. Wow, nothing like 9/11 imagery to get Gantz right back into form. We'll strap the hell in because a chapter later America has fallen, and Japan's next. Alien mechas crash into Tokyo. They blow up a baby, which is cheap manipulative writing. There's some moron screaming about the rapture, which proves how humanity is stupid. I didn't need you to tell me this, Oku. I'm the one continuing to read Gantz. It's a shame, because the robots that are stomping around are honestly cool, creepy cyber models. Unfortunately, based on Gantz's previous sins, the destruction they execute throughout the city doesn't feel like it matters whatsoever. The stupid, cheap calls to pathos, and the establishment of the chaos, as well as the constant rising action, just make this feel needlessly melodramatic. There are moments that maintain weight. Oku lands one with the impact of returning to one of his few talents, painting daunting scale. The introduction to the alien mothership is a formidable and bleak moment. There's utter chaos in Kei's first fight with one alien robot, towering over him like David to Goliath. Now juxtapose that on a world where there are countless numbers of these creatures. These short flashes of brilliance are once again overshadowed by Gantz being needlessly negative, as later, the Gantz Ball Masters just troll the Gantz troops by sending them to random locations after, far from where they were originally summoned. Oku, there was an inherent evil in enslaving humans to fight a hopeless war against aliens. What is the purpose of heightening that evil? Why are these people being evil just for the sake of it? You didn't need this development to establish them being evil. You only did it because you needed Kei to be away from Tai. So why are the Kei clone and Reika together after they're summoned? Because the story needs them to be. Look, this nonsense isn't chaotic and nihilistic. It's weak and wrought with stupid contrivances. So much so that we get some of the most cliched moments of Kei grasping at Tai, just barely missing her. Twice! Oku does this moment twice! It's a literal false peak! This is dumb, it's tired storytelling, and in the midst of such high stakes points in the story, it desperately needed something to shake up this formula to stick a gripping landing for the conclusion. For one last time, I want to touch on Sakurai. In the conclusion of the story, Sakurai finds himself with the voice of his girlfriend rattling in his brain, constantly echoing the sentiment that he is a good person, persisting as a hope in the rampant storm of hatred swelling inside him. It's intriguing to watch him be absolutely enraged, yet struggle to shred his last ounce of humanity due to his deep connection with another human being. A lot of Gantz's conclusion ends up confounding or outright undermining of the ethical dilemma and a dark versus light that Gantz had come to conjure up throughout arcs before this. However, Sakurai's previously established deep guilt that he had managed to overcome was a great foundation to have completely undone. It took a point in the story that was strong and maintained it in a morally questionable and psychotic section, showing Sakurai started to lose his mind again when he relapsed into his violent tendencies. The swings from Sakurai's redemption arc to his utter madness, perpetrating the most morose horrors that humanity is capable of, is tragic. It's only further hammered in by his ultimate ending, where he abandons the little hope he had left in the visage of his girlfriend and master, as he's been consumed by wrath and wants naught for anything less than the destruction of as many aliens as possible. He sincerely lost his mind by the end of Gantz, which makes his last act of saving 2 alien children as his life slowly draws to a close all the more revealing of his true character. At his deepest level, Sakurai is a kind human being who cares and wants to protect. The madness of the world itself warped him to be evil. When that's all stripped away, and he's at his most vulnerable, his true humanity shines through, and he acts virtuously. As dour as this conclusion is, and as genuinely mediocre and confused as it finds itself, Sakurai managed to show the meaning humans manifest in a meaningless world. Worry not, that momentary lapse of brilliance in the sea of bullshit is quickly reversed, as we meet the men behind the Gantz balls. Maybe now we'll get some rationale to make that development make sense. Nope, never mind. They're just evil businessmen who want to take over the world. Even in this lazy depiction of people bad, I do not for the life of me understand how sending your soldiers out to random places after a battle would do anything but hurt your plans of world domination. Presumably you need to not only defeat the aliens, but also have some sort of force that can maintain your power after the invasion is fought off. Considering that, why the hell would you purposefully antagonize your own troops?
The next long while in the conclusion of Gantz again focuses on the 2 Kuronos paths. One who I ostensibly see as the true main character, looking to desperately save his girlfriend, and the other a veritable empty husk, who's purely altruistic and just wants to rescue those who have been abducted. Clone Kei doesn't have much of a character aside from, I want to be a good guy and live, but he does lead us to meet some of the more interesting endgame cast, such as asexual Akihiko with somehow less eyebrows. In this side story you also get one of the most keynote expressions of human rebellion, as all the main characters of the rescue team proceed to whip it out and take a piss on the alien mothership in their human harvesting canals. You know, Oku misses the mark often with emotional logic. But here, all I can say is this is one of the most dead-on realistic human behaviors in any of his works. From here, Clone K and company have their Gantz ball hacked, and are summoned into an arena with computer-generated enemies. I say they're simply CG because I have no understanding of what these are supposed to be. Presumably, they're some species of alien the greater aliens have subjugated for their entertainment, but their models are really gross. Thus, the nicest thing I can say for a descriptor is CG. I feel really conflicted about this segment because in a way, some of these panels have really awesome art. I often speak of quality being derived from a juxtaposition against flaws. Some nice dialectical bullshit. Gantz's art is a prime example, especially in comparison to Oku's first CG manga, 01.
01 does not look great. Look, I'm glad Oku realized his typical bum-ass 5-head rheumatoid arthritis looking titty models needed updating. And you can see the makings of good art in 01. But ultimately, it still looks incredibly unfinished, as though the tech still needed tinkering.
Out of this primordial CG nightmare, you can really appreciate the zany and otherworldly sketch CG blend of Gantz all the more. And this really hits its stride artistically, towards the end of the manga when the tech had hit its peak. Muscle Rider in this updated format looks dumb kino. But then there's also these spiders. Why do they have balls? I assume this is supposed to be horrifying,
but it's just so stupid.
Meanwhile, in the A-plot of the story, OGK and Tai are reunited, and it's genuinely a very sweet moment. They finally found each other, and can finally escape from this nightmare. Wait, there's 30 chapters left. And wait, Tai just said she never wants to be a part again. No, Gantz. No more false peaks, Gantz. You already had Kate jump at the transport ship twice. Please, Gantz, no more false peaks. There's gonna be another false peak, isn't there? God damn it. Kei gets summoned into one of the DT Gantz mechs mentioned earlier, and then his instincts kick in, and he realizes that his only way to Tai is to survive. Thus, he starts blasting. Look, the Gantz mechs are kino, and they build into Kei's development with violence really well. But the conclusion starts dragging real hard right around here. We get a few of those really strong chapters with Sakurai, but otherwise the other developments are really unintriguing. I guess Reika dies, and the Kei clone is crying, but again, both of these characters are just so utterly vapid that I don't care. Then the massive mecha suits that the Gantz soldiers have been forced into magically unlock themselves, because the plot needs them to, which maybe there's narrative justification for this moment, but at this point I'm just too burnt out to expect Oku to try to structure his story. And more than that, I'm far too burnt out to try and find that justification. Anyhow, Kei goes on to get out, and he's so close to getting Tai. He's just within a finger's grasp. Oh god, he's gonna do it again, isn't he? This is gonna be another false peak, isn't it? Wait, no. It's not. They're actually together again. Ah, that's swell. I suppose I harp on Oku too much, you know? Like, the man's gotta have a chapter cliffhanger or two. That's just natural for a manga to keep selling, especially one this long. Anyway, here's where we get the stupid nonsense where Tai tells Kei not to kill the aliens, where she goes on to forget how awfully she was treated by literally all of the aliens except for one of them. Well, apparently that doesn't just mean Kei can't be the one to end them, it's also his job to save them now. As dumb as this is, I guess so is love, so I'll give him the pass for being a pussy-whipped bitch. Anyway, they go on and confront Nishi, and well, I guess this'll be where Oku wraps things up. Kei will beat Nishi up, and then they'll fly into the sunset to go, "What the hell is this? Oku, what are you doing? You're baiting Tai's death again? Didn't you literally just fake Tai's death out a chapter ago, dude? Cry wolf again, motherfucker, I dare you, I double dare you!" Look, I mentioned in chapter 2 that Tai is one of the few reasons I even care an ounce about the conclusion to Gantz. While that may be true, Oku is over-reliant on her to find weight in his conclusion. And yet again with Gantz, I find myself caring less overall. And of course, she caught a random handhold and is just hanging off the side of the robot. Why didn't she scream immediately after she caught the railing? Wouldn't that make more sense? Well, I guess then we wouldn't have had the time for Kei to get a moral conundrum where he refuses to blow up the aliens because his girlfriend wouldn't want him to. And that's important because, this conundrum is deep, man. It's totally not trying to force this message while being held together by the most shoddily structured foundation I've ever seen. And now we get back to our favorite Kureno, the clone. See, aboard the mothership, the remaining Gantz soldiers have decided they're going to use Gantz to get some answers. Somehow. I don't know how they figured it out, but apparently the balls offer the answers to the secrets of the universe. They're the monoliths. Now, I don't know how Oku had the gall to look back on his 370 chapters of horseshit and think, yeah, this has the integrity to have a 2001 A Space Odyssey vibe. But he sure as heck went for it. Hey, my favorite character, the reporter, is here. Bet this exposition's gonna be informative and thought-provoking. Nope. Here Gantz opts for some tell-don't-show nonsense, with a bunch of answers in the form of poetic musings about how human beings are prideful, that their moral relativism is skewed.
Bro, who asked?
Why do these omnipotent aliens care about Earth? Fuck if I know. Fuck if they know too. Reincarnation is a thing apparently. That's pretty chill, but they make it all sciencey, which really doesn't work, because Oku is not a scientist. The author of 2001: A Space Odyssey once proposed 3 laws of science fiction. One is especially prevalent considering Gantz. Law 2 states that the only way of discovering the limits of the possible is to venture a little way past them into the impossible. Gantz tries to rationalize its answers in a purely scientific manner, and it comes off not only as artificial, but also boring. Look, this entire section is utterly weak, and don't get me wrong, the random faces that Oku emulated like Morgan Freeman and Albert Einstein were kenography. But leave humorous swings in the conclusion to Chainsaw Man, because Gantz's conclusion had no emotional foundation to strengthen that humor. Just before the end, Kureno has to go back and face off against the Aryan leader of the Space Fascies. This undermines the whole "don't kill them" development, but oh well, guess we need Gantz to wrap up with a valiant victory for mankind, as that's clearly on brand thematically. Remember, it's like Starship Troopers, but this isn't satire. Anyhow, Kureno defeats Blondie and comes stumbling home. Whoa! He's a hero. This doesn't fit tonally at all. Hell, even 2chan starts rooting for him. And while this could be seen as humanity's expression of the light burning bright within the darkness, the light's expansion is jarring because it feels so sickly sweet. It feels forced to a degree. And maybe in the most ironic point yet, Oku was famously maligned by 2chan after Gantz wrapped up. They clowned on him for his dumpster fire of a conclusion to Gantz. And in a display that was no way premeditated, after hundreds of hours of coping and seething into his Dakimakura, Oku pathetically shot back at 2chan in Inuyashiki. Back in our story, as the entire world starts cheering for Kei in a nauseating display, our heroes come back to Earth, falling into the sea. When they wash up to the shore, they meet their loves on the beach and have a happy ending. This conclusion is tonally jarring. It confuses the important themes of the story, in favor of a happy ending. But that happy ending is unearned within the general scope of the story. It comes off with the same artificial feeling as the joy of the end of Starship Troopers, but their artificiality served a purpose. In the end, the framework of Gantz's internal diametrically opposed conflict is that of chaotic negativity that renders life meaningless, being countered by the pervasive human desire to persist through that. Answering questions to tie loose ends is a really great way to bear legitimate closure to a narrative. It parallels that very same pervasive human desire to persist through the meaninglessness. But the problem is, when you answer those questions in ways that confuse the internal meaning, it starts to sour the story. Gantz manages to do this one step further, and tries to continue dogpiling answers onto the already established answers. Because confusing confusion is unconfusing, yeah?
Worse yet, Gantz decides to not only provide answers to previously ambiguous questions,
but also settle on a theme of valiant victory over the aliens, which almost invalidates all of the tremendous loss and pain of some of the more brilliant moments in the conclusion, i.e. Sakurai. It's weak, it's contrived, it wanted to wrap everything up, and it just never needed to. Gantz could have ended bleakly, with Kei and Kato returning to Earth, seeing it smoldering, and holding their respective loves in an act of bittersweet hope within a dark world. They could have left the questions of Gantz completely unanswered, almost cementing the discomforting ambiguity of the violence that's innate within us. Gantz could have been so much better if things just weren't there. And I appreciate that a manga's runtime just demands more content. It's just a shame, because with the inclusion of all this fat, a sort of pervasive falsehood looms over the ending, rendering it insincere. And in a word, bad. Violence is inherent to human beings. It's a truth we often attempt to reject, forcing it out of sight, out of mind. As violence grows around us, and is reported on in greater detail due to our unhealthy fixations, a sort of desensitization occurs, oxymoronically normalizing and alienating this reality simultaneously. Paralleling this inescapable truth, we often dive into narratives that pepper themselves with violence, but in a misguided effort, that violence often washes over us without much in the way of meaning. I say all of this not condemning that shallow approach. I'm often a fan. But I'd also suggest that there's an innate value to capturing that human truth and imbuing it with meaning. Berserk does this, contextualizing the inescapable violence and the same enthralling unhealthy attachment we find in the real world, and then revealing the facade in the writhing interpersonal pain of the narrative. Chainsaw Man does the same, perhaps in a more wacky manner, but the sharp juxtaposition between the wild ride and the true heart of the narrative provides the same cathartic truth by story's end. The odd man out is Gantz, where I can't say for certain what was meant to be taken away. Muddled meaning and gross material didn't make for very much value. This would be a great way to end the video, standing in retrospect looking at the 3 stories in question with a conclusive view on the good, the bad, and the ugly. If you'll oblige me though, I have one more thing to leave you with. A guiding light in my development as a self-professed hippie came in the way of folk music. It seems to satisfy an abstract urge within me, but more than anything, the sentiments of peace and hope instilled in these ballads satisfy an inner calm amidst the storm of emotions that constantly surround me. An important figure amidst this genre is the artist once known as Cat Stevens, now Yusuf Islam. Stevens, like many a Brit musician, began in the world of pop in London, producing banal anthems that hardly light my fire. Amidst this, he came down with a bout of tuberculosis, which nearly took his life. During a year of recovery from his touch with death, in the midst of his liminality, he began to adapt new beliefs and became a folk rock icon. In perhaps my favorite of his works, Tea for the Tellerman, Stevens produced tracks that held much deeper resonance than anything previously released.
The opening track, Where Did the Children Play?, stands out in particular to me. A tragic song of times long gone, and a melancholy reflection of the world's life being squeezed out by industrialization's vice grip. When traveling in the United States, Stevens met his second close encounter with death, nearly drowning. Surviving this experience, he once again became spiritual. In this experience, he found Islam. In converting, he abandoned music, and his name.
Throughout his entire tenure, Stevens had been a deeply caring and peace-loving individual, his first brush with death inspiring that love. Yet in 1989, after years of being a voice in the hope of peace, Stevens fell. That year, a fatwa, a court's call for execution, had been placed on author Salman Rushdie due to his authorship of a contentious book on the Prophet Muhammad. When Stevens was questioned about his position on the fatwa, at the time he stated this: "The Quran makes it clear, if someone defames the Prophet, then he must die."
It's worth noting that after a while, Stevens rescinded his initial position, and has since claimed that he was misrepresented. Wherever his true beliefs lie, Stevens' initial statement provokes a question. Is there a value in trying to decipher a message from violence to attempt and understand it? Stevens' initial claim was volatile, uncharacteristic, and brutal. It seemingly manifested itself from nowhere. Out of a man who had embodied such a hope for peace and love before that, emerged a seditious anger. That anger doesn't follow a coherent or meditative formula like Chainsaw Man or Berserk. No, it reflects a self-contradictory violence, inescapable and incoherent. It reflects Gantz. Maybe I only reject Gantz because it makes me uncomfortable how aimless violence can often be, and even if I don't gain much in the way of satisfaction from that, maybe there's an inherent truth in it. Something about Gantz is very addictive, much like the news cycle feeding me constant dysphoric information on violence that permeates through the world around me. Like that violence, Gantz's formula kept me reading, even if at times I really didn't want to. Berserk, Gantz, and Chainsaw Man are violent, because violence is our reality. But perhaps there need not be order within that to reflect life, truly. Maybe in their own way, they're all an honest reflection of a wild world.
Oh, baby, baby, it's a wild world. It's hard to get by just upon a smile.
Nope. Fuck that. Not doing that melodramatic bullshit ending. This poetic concession to Gantz would have been a cute way to shed my crocodile tears, but Gantz doesn't deserve that. As I've grown up, Cat Stevens doesn't exist to me permanently stained by one malicious remark amongst a tenure of beauty. And in and of itself, that malicious remark doesn't hold any deeper importance. And at its best, Gantz's truest realization of violence is the experience I had reading it. It's the intense discomfort rendered upon me, in dashing my expectations of even a shred of competence or profound meaning from a narrative perspective. It only exists as a kernel of shock with no stopping power in the long run. Is violence sometimes unpredictable or incoherent? Absolutely. That is a truth to the world I refuse to dismiss. But should it be valued equally to the raw and human truth of the presence of violence as an unconscious force, and the cathartic value I can get out of a narrative that imbues meaning within that violence? Nah, fuck that.
Like with Stevens, I choose to feel power in the gravity of what is meaningful to me, not the vapid intrigue of an inconsequential narrative that has traces of sincerity. Once upon a time in this script, I spent pages discussing the advent of the Western genre and how violence seeded itself into the foundation. The introduction to this script included a line from Blood Meridian that I found incredibly poignant.
War was always here. Before man was, war waited for him. The ultimate trade awaiting its ultimate practitioner.
While violence is inherent to the human spirit, what's equally innately human is searching for meaning in that behavior. In a story, this reflects itself as a well-conceived character of violence, which maintains consistency and broaches interesting ideas throughout many facets of the narrative. While I find this quote really fitting for the conclusion, I can't justify the 8 pages I wrote about Westerns, all for one joke about Chris Kyle. Not only was the script too long as is, writing that section would have required me to rewatch The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly just to justify my chapter headers. That movie's 3 hours long. Bro, I'm not doing it. Likewise, I'm lazy, and I'm not rewriting this. Bear with me. Perhaps Berserk is the greatest Western of all time, taking inspiration from classic shoujo and shonen manga and other contemporary greats. It stood as a hallmark for the medium of manga. Unlike movies though, Berserk is not confined to a single point in time, and through its longevity, it adapted the ability to be simultaneously reflective and cynical. In a way, I have to award Berserk the crown because it's lived through so many periods. It is as much The Good, the Bad, and the Ugly as it is Blood Meridian or Deadwood. Gantz desperately wanted to have the power of Berserk. It wanted to take the ball and run with it. But in trying to be something Oku didn't have the talent for, the outcome was a vapid mess. Still, despite the story being garbage, or Oku's psychotic nature, or even its contradictory, poorly conceived character of violence, people still enjoy Gantz. I mean, hey, it had that funny meme face. And seeing as Oku's spun that series off to shit, it clearly has some legs. So maybe Gantz also sits in the golden age of Westerns as a manga as well. But it's one that didn't get Clint Eastwood or John Wayne. Probably got some C-list star, like Whit Bissell. Chainsaw Man, on the other hand, like Gantz and its inspiration from Berserk, went a different direction. Out of the cocoon of violence, understanding it innately, Fujimoto seized the character of violence and wove it anew. When the greatest story ever told is too top-notch to ever be done better, do something different. Get weird.
Mastermind. ROC. Double MG. Jay, I got it. 4 stacks for the hills on my bitch feet. Car seat still smelling like 10 keys. Tell a plug that I'm looking for an increase. Wingstop, fat boy, need a 10-piece. Say a nigga name in the car star. Nigga switching lane to lane like Walmart. Sipping Bordeaux, white Bordeaux. Has the lights flashing on the Bordeaux. Switch the Benzo for the Enzo. Back to the Benzo when the Enzo. Switch your old bitch from a new bitch. Come a new bitch, something like an info. But the game raw when I came in it. Getting money ever since I came in it. You couldn't stop me if you tried. Motherfucker, cause the devil is alive. Big guns, big whips. Rich nigga talking big shit. Double cup, gold wrist. Double up on that blow.